Okay, let's put it like that. All right, welcome everybody to Bread Theory once again. I'm your host Zach, and tonight we're going to be doing some stuff about urbanism with my guest Dan Plaat of the Three Left Show. How you doing tonight, Dan?
Uh, I'm tolerable. I've been under the weather today. I think it's pretty much allergies, or I took an allergy pill that hit me harder than I thought. I don't know, but I'm getting a little bit of echo.
Oh, are you? Okay. I wonder what that's about.
It's distant, so
Let's see then.
maybe your mic is picking up. Could be not from your headphones.
It could be. Well, gain control input and see if that helps at all.
Test, test.
Test this. See, I don't hear any echo at all. Are you still hearing it?
Slightly, but it's better.
Okay.
Just hard to entirely ignore.
Yeah. Sorry about that. If anyone there in the chat is experiencing the same thing, please let me know. Oh, what are we doing? I have a bad network connection. That's not good. Looks like it's streaming though, so I think we'll just have to go ahead for now. Oh, clear
Okay.
here. Good. Good to know.
Oh, you know what? It's
Thanks.
fine. You know what? I noticed it, but it's very slight. So as long as yeah, I can go.
Okay. Okay. Um, yeah, just so yeah, anyway, tonight we're doing some new urbanist stuff. I think I'll pull up that first video that you wanted to cover tonight. Was it the
Yeah.
3D printing one that you wanted to do first?
No, the Honkler 3D,
The Honker 3D one. All
Honker
right.
3D. Yeah.
So we'll be
Wrap
talking.
up. There's more from him, but obviously that's the one that I kind of wanted to share with your audience
Yeah, for sure.
because I like it a lot. It not only explains the kind of discourse about brutalism pretty well, because whether it's urbanist or architecture pages, brutalism is this whipping dog of sorts. Everyone loves to
Right.
hate it, but no one has a clear like understanding of why. It's because I mean, maybe it's part of the trolling culture of just like, why is this? Why?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
curious
Yeah.
about why, but just like angry at something,
Angry at
or
something.
something like that. Like there was this a Green Party candidate in New York City actually got some like exposure of sorts by a numtot sharing their lit. And because it's a mailer or a piece of lit, when you put your platform on it, it's really difficult to express what your platform is in 5-word sentences. It needs to be like hashtags, and depending on how people read a hashtag or interpret it, it could be something they like or something they hate. Like
Sure.
when, say, the plank of using natural medicine. Now, when we're using it in discussion of, like, say, drug policy, we're talking about the ability to decriminalize all kinds of things that are currently made illegal, like, say, using psilocybin mushrooms to treat depression, or marijuana, or various other types of plants that aren't, say, drugs, but still unregulated and thus illegal and criminalized. And so we put making available natural remedies. Now, there'll
Right.
be a few comments that show like people read natural remedies, they think homeopathy, they think some woo-woo bullshit. Um, Now, there are some members of ours that maybe do mean that, but a lot of us don't.
Right.
And so, yeah, so there's just issues like that. But one of his things was like some non-taught platform, and the way most were or half were interpreting as being anti-transit or something, because he talked of like, I think he had a line specifically to retain parking spaces, but or
Oh.
something like that. But yeah, so it's probably like, unless you've written, I mean, you got to try it before you buy it. Unless you've written a platform for yourself and know how difficult it is to accurately represent what you want to be represented to people, as well as represent what you actually believe, it's hard. It's hard on a palm card.
Yeah,
Like if you
absolutely.
maybe online, people are used to writing essays to explain their position, or they're okay with just throwing out a hashtag and letting it lay because there's no consequence. If you're running for office, there is. So it's like,
Yeah, yeah, very true.
all these haters, you'd think they'd all run for office themselves and done great, and they know exactly what they're doing. But people are, there's critics, people critics.
Yeah, yeah. You're never gonna get away from that. It's easiest thing in the world to be a critic, and not even have a good opinion, but get a lot of attention. All right, shall we get into the video then?
The
Right, I
late,
think.
not the latest, but it was the next in line after the Earth, Wind, and Air, Earth, Wind, and Water
Yeah.
trilogy. So,
Oh,
yeah,
cool. Yeah. All right, so here we go.
this is a fun one.
We are a peaceful people who desire to live in peace with all other peoples. But it is difficult to settle or even discuss these problems in an atmosphere of intimidation. That is why this latest Soviet threat, or any other threat, which is made either independently or in response to our actions this week, must and will be met with determination.
Mid-century modern.
Yeah, that's for sure.
It's got to end with the Empire State Plaza. I want you to pause on it.
Sure thing.
There. Stop it. So that's the Empire State Plaza in Albany. And it has quite a story to it, as most buildings do, but this one in particular because no one in Albany actually wanted it. It was purely the governor, Nelson A. Rockefeller, grandson of the first one.
Yeah.
And so 60 blocks were destroyed to build this thing.
60 blocks.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what was it, 40? Between 40 and 60. But it's called, like, there's a documentary I can promote called The Neighborhood That Wasn't There, or The Forgotten Neighborhood or something. I'll have to remind myself. But it was mostly like half Italian, mostly Italian neighborhood. But it's based like most slum clearance. I mean, it will be mentioned in the video that, it was just a complete boondoggle. Oh yeah, so here's something cool about this site. So in order to get it built and get it built fast, Rockefeller basically just told all the unions, do whatever you want, like whatever it takes to get the job done. You don't have to follow any rules. We're gonna lax. There's not gonna be any inspections. Roughly $9 million of material was stolen off-site, and there were 60 different fires during the construction.
60 during the construction?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Now the fires are likely, it's projected, to be covers for theft. You start a fire and then you can basically take a truckload of marble off the site. Someone actually tallied all of the actual materials, like how much in tonnage was taken off site. So it ran over budget and all that stuff, and there's a lot of creative accounting to fund it, similar to the Tappan Zee Bridge, the new Tappan Zee. I'm not going to call it the Mario Como Bridge, but just like our recent governor, this one he also named after himself, not after his grandfather or father, but himself. And so it's Nelson Rockefeller Plaza. It's stacked with the Rockefellers' collection of modern art. So it's a nice kind of modern art gallery. But it's otherwise kind of both loved and hated, or at least maybe because I've grown up with it and it's all I know. And it is a kind of a large public plaza. And it's kind of the only one we got. we don't really have a lot of big public spaces besides the parks that flank the Capitol, at least to assemble a protest. But it's also state property, so it's also not really, and it's also extremely defensible. It really is like a fortress. It'd be if there's a zombie apocalypse and you need a lot of people to gather someplace, it's pretty defensible.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's what also makes it kind of, it's not poor. You notice the big line of building there. There's basically a nice walkable neighborhood on the other side of that.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say these plazas are just massive. Like that's not inviting at all to really walk around
It's
unless you
nice,
happen to work in those
right?
buildings.
It's nice when you're there, but it's on the, but
Right.
as far as the urbanism goes, it's terrible.
Yeah.
But it is kind of the only place you can kind of have a large festival that's organized, or
Mm-hmm.
it's good for concerts. There's a bandstand. It's where the fireworks are usually, and but yeah, any public life there has to be organized and put there. It's not really, none of it's organic. It can't be because it's controlled by the state. You need the OGS's permits and whatever. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we can move on. I just wanted to get that out of the way.
Cool. Yeah, yeah. No. So
My
and so for those
local
who,
story.
yeah, yeah. No, that adds a lot of good context. So Brave Dave asked where this is located. This is
Albany,
Albany,
New
right?
York.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or
Albany. I just want to make
Albany. Excuse me.
because
Not Albany.
there was this other video where somebody actually went much. I mean, your way is understandable, but someone called it like Albany, or
Albany.
like like I totally forgot how, but it was so cringe. I just like I just had to spell it out like all ba ni. Anyway, okay.
Sure, sure. And so then Brave Dave says it's good to interact with chatters on Twitch. If it's observable that you are streaming here and not interacting with Twitch viewers, you'll eventually be banned under violations of TOS. Albany. Okay. So I think probably on a little delay there because, I am trying to engage with the comments and stuff. But anyway, yeah, let's move on.
No, all with two L's. Yeah, Brave Dave is like, no, it's Al Ba
Albany.
Nah
Albany.
Knee. Oh,
Albany.
nah. Yeah, nah.
A valiant effort, but not quite.
Yeah. Stupid city.
Whether you're just joining the DSA or you're a pedantic militant with a cult-like appreciation for the guy who beat Hitler, among the left there is a nearly universal affinity for brutalism and trains. This video is not about trains. But it's not exactly about brutalism. Brutalism is an architectural movement that's very hard to describe consistently. It has several iterations across the world, and it tends to get caught up in a web of other isms like rationalism, functionalism, formalism, expressionism, each with its own set of origins and influences. So it's all very dense and academic. So all I want to try to talk about here is something
Which I've
I
read.
am, against my better judgment, calling civic thick.
Civic thick.
And like many tough to define terms, it might be easier to talk about what it isn't. From the colonial days, architecture in the United States was primarily about replicating the old world to give settlers a familiar feeling when they arrived. Builders paid homage to the popular Georgian style of London, the Gothic cathedrals, the classic architecture of Rome. This trend of recreating old styles to cash in on their cultural value is what critics like to call associationalism. Mostly this meant building big banks with columns and triangular hats.
Can you pause?
There was the Boston Public...
Go for
In
it.
my mind, I actually thought he was going to say historicism, not associationalism. So associationalism is like maybe more of the architectural theory term, and then in terms of like style term, it's usually called historicism as an umbrella term that encompasses all these different kind of types.
Okay.
So I just want to point that out. And also to Brave Dave, if you do live in Albany, send me a message immediately. I do want to hang, or I don't know, unless I already know you, which would be kind of cool. But I don't know many Daves, unless Dave is just a moniker. So
Could be. Yeah, and also you asked about what we make of Stalin's purge after World War II. Not quite what we're talking about tonight, so we're gonna try and keep it on the topic of urbanism and that sort of thing. It's okay to talk
Yeah.
about leftist stuff, but
that's
yeah,
you're reading State and
State and Revolution right now.
yeah, you're reading State and Revolution. I think that's more of a question for that. How are you thinking about that anyway?
I'm really liking State and Revolution a lot. It's explaining a lot of those kind of nebulous terms like the withering away of the state and dictatorship of the proletariat. I'm really coming to understand them in a much deeper sense. And I mean, so far, I have not really found anything to disagree with Lenin about. So yeah,
That's how they get
it's
you.
been good so far. Yeah, that's true.
And thus you automatically support everything that the guy who
everything that-
personally killed Hitler did.
Yeah, for sure.
I say sarcasm.
No, I got you. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I do talk about leftist stuff, Brave Dave. So yeah, that's cool, and we can talk about leftist stuff as it relates to what we're watching. But I just kind of want to keep it on that. And also,
Yeah.
I haven't really personally.
This video, this video. What's good about this video is it ties into the architecture that people hate into the politics of the Cold War and imperialism. So it's like, that kind of like how usually we leftists online. It's like, look, that thing you hate, it's capitalism. We also, there's just as many conversations we can have where it's like, hey, that architecture that you hate in your town, that's imperialism. Or it's related to American practice of it. How can you hate a building? You think it's ugly or or destroyed your neighborhood, or made your rents go up.
Yeah. It's just not really hating the building itself. It's hating probably what the building did, or what it replaced, or how it's changed your life in some way.
Yeah, it's
buildings only have buildings only matter in terms of how they relate to people.
Yeah.
And their
Well, fear and
interactions.
ignorance will play into the conversation of this video. So.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah. So we'll continue on anyway. But yeah, just to reiterate, Brave Dave, I haven't even studied Stalin at all, so that would be not very fruitful conversation at this point. I'll get back to you later when I've dove into at least some of his theoretical work. So.
Library from 1887, which was designed to be a palace of the people and to tie together the nearby churches of Copley Square. There was the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, which presented a harmonious and grandiose neoclassical display for its global audience at the World's Fair. And there was the 1910 Penn Station, which was a massive subway terminal that echoed styles from all over Europe to symbolically welcome travelers to the New World. Because of its capitalist economy, almost all innovations of architecture in America were driven by private interests, from the dense company towns to the lavish plantation houses. Even the ostensibly public buildings like libraries and city halls were almost exclusively commissioned to aristocrats who would go to their friends on city council like, I want to build you a new place to work. And they'd be like, are you white? Okay, go for it. There wasn't a central guiding vision other than capital, which is always and only guided by the bottom line. With the advent of the skyscraper, the United States had a chance to carve out its own architectural identity that wasn't a revival of a bygone era. The most iconic entries of this identity were commercial and office towers. These skyscrapers quickly came to embrace modernism and the international style, which rejected the ornamentation and extravagance of previous styles.
In the same way that other art movements
with fancy capitals that had
in the same way that other art movements rejected the past historical styles before World War I, to reject the culture that created the human catastrophe of the world wars, to reject that is to kind of take on a futurism, which can also be melded with fascistic, living as well, or politics.
Sure.
But which is why some modern architects worked for basically any side that would pay them. It was Corbusier, even like in his last years in Europe, he submitted a So there's the Barcelona Pavilion, which was one of these like flashpoints of modernism, where it was like kind of the first. It was like a showpiece house where there were walls, but the walls weren't connected. But they were connected with glass pane, so it was breaking the box, literally.
Yeah, sure.
And it was the first kind of do that. Barcelona was a center of culture, that's for sure. So, fast forward 10 years, or it was like 29 that this happened, some late 20s. He submitted for a competition hosted by the Nazis, or at least the German state run by the Nazis. A similar design, and so you have like the same kind of modernist Barcelona kind of building with a little difference, but it's got like a swastika flag next to it. And this picture doesn't show up much in most Corbusier books, but it kind of shows that like, you know, modernism can be appropriated by any modern ideology, which is also something that this video goes into, that the civic Thicc and the brutalism is not just it's capitalists associate it with Soviet housing blocks. Lefties can associate it with the Fed and imperialism. So let's continue then.
Yeah, sure.
These skinny little pilotis, and instead of isolated windows with embellished frames, it had ribbon windows which wrapped buildings in strips of glass. And instead of triangular hats which pointed up to heaven, it had blank flat roofs which pointed nowhere because God is dead
or something.
The international style gave American skyscrapers a mass-produced feeling because they all kind of looked the same. Their boxy designs could easily be transposed onto nearly any urban environment.
Hey, made everybody happier.
Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who popularized
That's what
the
happened
style,
to the Penn Station,
an almost invisible building with.
What's that? What is?
That's what happened to Penn Station. So you remember the Penn Station that he showed with the multiple styles?
I'm having trouble recalling.
So it was a train station that he showed in this little like cavalcade of historicism, and Penn Station was one of the first. Wasn't the first victim, but it was a flashpoint that created the historical preservation movement, because you had this wonderful, loved train station that, for private interest's sake, was completely demolished and replaced with Madison Square Garden, with Penn Station being moved underground, which is still a Amtrak station. But I mean, for the last 20 years, it's just been one kind of boondoggle plan after another in an attempt to make it a actual daylit functioning, or rather nice train station again, which price tags just keep going up every year because of the construction and the politics involved. I remember it was, I think, Governor Christie that was kind of blocking it 10 years ago. Didn't want it, wasn't cooperating, of course. And then Como was dicking around. I can't really relate all the details. I just give you an impression that it was...
Sure.
Some of the designs were okay. It was basically, there's this nice neoclassical post office in the block over. And it was like, let's turn the post office into a new Penn Station, since the tracks are literally running under it. But yeah, that's the...
Interesting.
It's just, there's so many problems with doing anything.
With doing anything, yeah.
Yeah. Same with like, there's this video about expanding the Port Authority, which is the big bus terminal, and how there's just so many buses, they're just backed up. And the answer seems to be like this filling of 2 more city blocks with just like bus infrastructure. It's weird, but horrifying if implemented.
Yeah, for sure.
Glass skin. And as skyscrapers came closer and closer to realizing this, they gained a sort of weightlessness. Lewis Mumford called the Lever House exquisitely fragile and undaunted by the threat of being melted into a puddle by an atomic bomb. This was 7 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Which sort of points to why the international style took root in the United States. They had the symbolic power of having dropped 2 nuclear bombs on a country that had already surrendered, and the triumph of emerging from World War II virtually unscathed. Compare this to England, a country which emerged from World War II very scathed. This is where something called the New Brutalism began. One of the first buildings this term was applied to was the Hunstanton School in Norfolk. You may notice that this looks very little like what we might call brutalism. In fact, the first major text to discuss this style points out that this building is extremely similar to the international style. It clearly exposes its structure and plan by doing away with decoration. It appears to be made of what it is made of. There's no whitewash, no glazing, no terracotta. Where this new brutalist style diverged was its rawness, its bloody-mindedness, its not giving a shit. Brutalism also gets its name from béton brut, or raw concrete, which Le Corbusier used in post-war projects in France like this housing building and this monastery. This not giving a shit attitude was imbued into many early brutalist structures that were built as mass housing as Europe attempted to rebuild from the ruins of the war. The critic Ollie Mould says that this not giving a shit was not out of haphazardness or lack of sincerity, but had a clear social goal. Early brutalists wanted their buildings to be blank canvases to be transformed through human activity. So while international style projects were designed to be immutable and uniform, like the Lakeshore Apartments, which wouldn't allow tenants to change their window blinds, or the Lever House, which was hermetically sealed with inoperable windows, this new brutal movement only wanted to provide the basic building blocks and then let organic life take over. America was experiencing a different movement.
So I never really realized that about the early brutalist stuff, is that it was meant to be just a baseline that you add on to? Like, how are they conceiving of that happening just organically? That I don't get.
Paint. You
just
can
paint. Oh, okay.
You can paint concrete. You can also, using tools, bolt stuff into it that hang, and alter it. I mean, hell, you could. The point is to give you a skeleton of which to kind of put. Can you ban Cottonmouth, or does he like contribute something later?
I have no idea.
Okay. Let's see. So then, no, I'm completely off track.
Sorry,
but yes, it's about, the point was to, instead of, there was always this debate that's always been raging about the role of the architect. Are they kind of providing all of the art and the design for people, or are they the facilitator of a living shell from which people can then live in the same way that, like, because there was this infatuation with the vernacular, what people do when there's no architects. And this was something especially that came about in the 60s. There was this MoMA show called like Architecture Without Architects. And it was just vernacular stuff like barns and things built in rural villages where there's wonderful artistry and there's no architect involved. There's no professional, right? So people can decorate, and people decorate their own houses as they wish, and it's very democratic and bottom up in that way. So an architect is like kind of trying to not be an authoritarian here and tell people how to decorate, or how their building will be decorated. It's already set, the stonework, the molding. No, you get to decide. The issue with the implementation in the long haul is that people need to have enough wages that they can afford to alter their living space. Now, either you're a tenant and you can't alter it to your liking, or because you're a tenant, if you alter it, it's permanent, or at least it's for the long term. So if you have half the country renting, and you have landlords who don't want to change the molding or alter it to what they like, because, hey, if they're going to rent it to someone else, they need to be able to basically decorate with temporary things. So the building is always just going to be this bland shell, and people hang up their posters or art or their knickknacks on shelves, but never shelves that are built into the wall like
of course,
well-designed houses. It needs to be as generic as possible to be rentable, to be sellable, to be a commodity. It's kind of assumed, at least like the vision of the architect, the modernist architect is a socialist architect, or at least they have a social, a soc dem or dem soc kind of leaning of assuming that the people people who live in these apartments are going to be owned by the people living there. So they will be invested in painting the walls, or the very least they'll be allowed to. But in a real 20th century context, the building is always built by a state apparatus that is, going to set down rules, a landlord or a developer that's going to set down the aesthetic, and altering it like a homeowners association is actually criminalized.
Yeah.
Like there's this one story involving public housing, and where the mother wanted to kind of teach her kids off when they're out of school, because maybe the school's stuck. And she basically she wanted to paint one of the walls black so they could use it as a blackboard. And this was like, she was kicked out for this, or she had to fight the managers.
Yeah, that's absolutely ridiculous. And yeah, I mean, if you're actually leasing or renting a space, you'd think you'd have a little bit more protection to alter things, as long as it didn't, fundamentally change the structure of the place. But, things are not legally aligned in that way. So, Brave Dave and Cottonmouth, this is for you as well. This is not a debate channel. You're not going to keep trying to get me into debates here. This is a leftist stream, first and foremost. That flag that you keep referencing there, that is part of, you can see it flash there. I'm going to take all leftism and whatnot. So that is why there's a hammer and sickle there. I'm hoping I wasn't muted at that point.
It's all the symbols.
Yeah,
and it's all the symbols, and symbols. We have a diversity of symbols.
For sure.
It's kind of interesting. It was meme analysis was kind of pointing this out, that like we've had Middle Ages onward, like there's been a consolidation of symbols. Islam, Christianity, other monotheisms. That you have one symbol, and that's the catch-all. That's all the symbols you need. If you have any other symbols, you're a pagan, or not a pagan, heretic. Similarly, but with the death of God or whatever, we're kind of bringing all these different symbols back, and in this huge range, in the form of memes, because the meme is a symbol too. And that goes for all the leftists. Kind of like before, like with the Cold War, all of our symbols were erased. We couldn't use them. We couldn't use a leftist. We couldn't have a workers' culture, or a culture that celebrates workers' history and the symbols that it's had for good, whether they represent a big state or a bottom-up movement. Because every successful revolution started as something that was bottom-up. And so it's kind of like it's both, both the oppressive regime, but also the successful workers' revolt, where the oppressed actually took power and used it. Yeah,
absolutely. But anyway, the point being, Brave Dave, like, yeah, I'm not going to debate you on the validity of any of these symbols. They are what they are, and this is what this stream is about. And if that's not something you can handle, then basically you can go somewhere else.
We're doing the same thing. Yeah, subjectivist morality, the whole like we're just doing the same thing. Well, as far as using symbols, I mean, that's like saying we both eat food, but what those symbols mean, yes, you believe that these symbols are symbols of evil, or they represent things of evil. Yeah, states arm their citizenry. They also will go into, this video goes into how it built housing for everyone. Food isn't what they mean. The grain is when people are hungry and they want to have a political movement that represents the desire to be well fed. Well, whatever, Brave Dave. I mean, if you're talking, if you just want to talk, like what kind of ideology do you have? Are you coming from a place of anarchism? Are you coming from a place of a right libertarian? But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about all kinds of other stuff. So let's just keep playing the video.
Yeah, and hammer and
Yeah.
sickle's been adopted by many communist movements. It still is, considered a communist symbol, representing the workers of the world. So you don't have
It
to like
wasn't
it.
adopted. Well, here's the history lesson. It wasn't adopted. It was created
Sure.
by a competition that was won by a 10-year-old girl, unless that's a myth. But it was a
Yeah,
competition,
I'm
and
not
that
sure.
was what was submitted, and then it's like, oh, what a great idea, you know?
Cool.
But
Yeah, and I mean, there's plenty of symbols that you can associate with mass murderers throughout time, including, say, the American flag, and basically pick any symbol that has been associated with any state, and at some point, it's going to be associated with something bad. So, I mean,
well, here
again,
we don't have to
I'm sorry.
argue. We have the video, and the video will make the case that even though there's we have these two rival empires, and their architecture representing themselves is very, very similar. So let's play and learn.
Yep. So we're
So
going to
just-
keep going on, and again, yeah, we're not going to debate this stuff. So you're just going to have to either accept it or move on to a different stream.
Designers were getting bored of the paint-by-numbers corporate monotony and were looking towards monumentality. In 1944, Louis Kahn wrote that even with the new technology of the modern age, structures should retain a spiritual quality, which conveys the feeling
toured
of
this
eternity
building, by the
that
way.
cannot be added to or changed.
Oh yeah,
Very nice.
What? Oh, let me go back 1 second. Is it
Yeah.
so? It looks pretty nice on the inside.
Is very nice. It has these wood columns and stuff. Actually, if you give me a moment, I can bring up it's in Yale, or rather New Hartford. Let's see. Don't bring up my share my screen when I ask it to.
Yeah,
Here's a good
definitely
picture. Okay, share my screen.
will. Okay, it doesn't look like it's sharing the right one. I think
Oh,
you
right,
have it
right.
locked.
Sorry, I have it
Yeah.
as a browser. Let me
Yeah,
change that.
Do like tab or something like that. That's what I usually do.
There we go. Oh, wait, no, it's not going to be that. That's the folder.
Sure.
I
problem.
want.
Bring it up as soon as you're ready.
No, it's not showing anything. Okay, I'll change it to tire screen, and then boom. Do you see now?
Yes. So we'll go with that.
The art
Bring that
gallery.
up there. Yeah. I mean, that is really beautiful inside. And there's a lot of light coming in from the top too. That's really
Yeah.
a nice space.
And it's got the
I
wood
mean,
paneling, so it's the structure is still concrete, right, with the
Mm-hmm.
bands, but it's got the wood paneling that's kind of on it. Let's see, there's an office in that building.
Mm-hmm.
That's the front door. You can kind of see the little molding there. Here's the side.
yeah, see, it's just those really blank spaces that I don't like as much, especially when you look at that one side of it. It looks like what Jane Jacobs used to call the severed limbs of buildings. So that I don't find so attractive. But basically everything else looks okay. Even that glass front there, it has some interesting
And
architectural
then the side
characteristics.
here is the side here is blank except for the lines.
Yeah.
It's not a full engaging streetscape because it is an art museum. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, but that picture of the inside, here's another kind of looking over.
Very cool.
Yeah. So
Cool.
all right.
Good.
That was
to
part of
see.
my tectonics class where we actually took a day trip to New Haven and toured Yale.
Cool. That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Retain a spiritual quality, which conveys the feeling of eternity that cannot be added to or changed. For Rainer Banham, this was memorability as an image that comes not from the symbolism or beauty imbued in a structure, but the thing itself in its totality and with all the overtones of human association. This may explain why lots of brutalist buildings resemble things like the inverted ziggurat, the ship, the gunship, the UFO, the bunker. The bunker was popular. But what most clearly separated this movement from the international style was the type of building. Social housing, city hall, library, courthouse, Social Security Administration, FBI, Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Housing and Urban. Wait a second. These are all monuments to
Big government.
Big government. Big government. Big government. Big government.
Big government. big government.
Big government.
Gingrich? A progressive? Really?
When used in social housing projects like Robin Hood Gardens in London, this style earned a reputation for coldness, decay, crime, mismanagement, poverty. And when used in civic structures, it earned a reputation for institutional overreach, surveillance, authoritarianism. These two reputations for the same style of building seem incompatible. How can a government both drastically mismanage something to the point of it crumbling apart, but also run efficiently enough to do bad things and strike fear into their subjects? Well, to answer that question, we're going to ask some people who know a lot about having two incompatible reputations.
Really? Yes.
Triangular hats.
Now let's see the other side.
The Soviet Union. The October Revolution in 1917 led to 4 years of civil warfare as the Soviets secured control over formerly Imperial Russia. With their radical new form of democratic centralist government, political and creative thinkers saw a huge opportunity and a necessity to inspire a cultural revolution in the masses of mostly illiterate peasants. The first instance of this was Vladimir Tatlin's Monument to the Third International, which was to be a headquarters for the worldwide communist revolution.
Okay, pause it.
Sure.
This monument never made it past.
There we go.
Yeah, so this drawing, the picture you saw in this model, doesn't quite express the scale of it. So, kind of each level you see there is kind of one gigantic. It's kind of like the scale of, maybe you probably haven't seen it, but like the Nazis were planning like this big urban renewal similar thing in Berlin that they never really got to build, but it was like this gigantic center that could hold like it's like a stadium, but it had a big stone dome on it.
Oh.
And it was so big it would have like it would rain inside. But
okay.
this has a similar scale that like it's meant to like all of the representatives from all the Soviets / communes would be meeting here throughout the whole world. So it had this, basically a stadium-sized assembly hall, and that's on like the second level, with like kind of more executive or restaurants on the top levels. So think like this is like this hall is like the big Burj Dubai. Or maybe they're thinking more of the scale, maybe like twice this, like a big 2 Eiffel Towers.
Wow!
Just to give you a sense of the scale, but it's a conceptual.
Yeah, it's meant to be basically a multi-tiered city, basically, right? In itself.
Yeah,
almost.
yeah. Basically, just a bunch of assembly halls, convention center. Basically, think like the size of the LA Convention Center in a tower.
Wow.
That's the model form, but it started a movement which was a synthesis of painting, sculpture, and architecture called constructivism. This style was advocated by the Union of Contemporary Artists, OSA, founded by Moise Ginsburg, who said that architects should no longer be decorators of life, but organizers of it. OSA acknowledged that architecture was inseparable from social and political problems, and therefore must crystallize the new socialist way of life. The crippled economy demanded the most efficient use of material and the absence of all superfluous elements, but there was an incredible optimism in the blank slate that the wars had created. Ginsburg and constructivists also coined a new term for architecture's role as a social condenser, that which would consolidate human activity.
Because Hager doesn't kind of cover this, that the line, architects as the organizer of life, not the decorator of it. So to probably the freedom-loving mind, this has overtones of like it's part of Reaganite propaganda that or even Clinton, new Democrats, that we've been trying to solve social problems with social engineering, the Great Society programs, welfare, just generally having a state that organizes social production or something. And architects saw themselves as being part of this because, I mean, back in the 20s, it was an amazingly new and promising concept, and it did have many benefits for industrializing societies as well as America, where it was industrializing. We couldn't, the New Deal was part of, like, this applied to America was the New Deal and the Great Society, which helped many, many people, including my parents. But it was basically destroyed by the 80s. And we millennials have basically been grown up in a world without this social engineering. And we've all been free to do, well, we've been free to be screwed by large institutions, whether they be domestic or international capitalists.
Yeah, yep. Just a different sort of master.
So I just wanted to point out that, like, you could see the negative of social engineering, or like organizers of society using architecture, because architecture is an intervention instead of just we're decorators and we're artists. But we won't. But an architect always kind of wants to be more, since we're not just painting on a canvas. We're making something nice to look at. We're making something that people actually use. So after a century of serving the rich and decorating things with Art Nouveau and stuff, and even stuff that looks really nice, but it's always just been for the bourgeois class.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So to actually be socially responsible and make architecture for the masses, it has to be cheap, reliable, reproducible. And because of all this new industrial technology, that's just like today, architects are like, going in a tizzy over. We'll hit a video that actually kind of hits on this. Get obsessed with new technology, like modularity, and you basically get brutalism. So let's keep going.
Interesting. Yeah.
Activity and electrify the new communist lifestyle. This term was appropriated and widely spread by our friend Rim Koolhaas in the 2000s.
AKA Cool Hat.
These social condensers were communal housing, of course, but they were also childcare facilities, laundries, communal bakeries, places where previously individualized activity would be done with the collective, to relieve the burden of domestic labor and to foster camaraderie. An entirely new type of building, the Workers' Club, was created as a place to celebrate and spread the new culture. The idea that architecture has a social role was not at all new. Ossa directly drew from Charles Fourier's self-contained utopian Phalansteries. But this was the first time that the idea could be tested on a grand scale with explicitly class-based language. Before the information embargo of the Iron Curtain, there was quite a bit of cross-pollination between East and West. Albert Kahn, the guy who basically built Detroit, was shipped in to help design factories, and Louis Kahn, no relation, designed a pretty cool monument to Lenin. Le Corbusier himself, who constructivists saw as a soulmate, designed a building for the Union of Consumer Cooperatives in 1928. Constructivism flourished in the late 20s, but was replaced in the early 30s by a style known as socialist realism, or the guy who personally killed Hitlerism. This was a new form of classicism that allegedly appealed to the traditional nostalgia of the masses, but which also drew heavily from the wedding cake skyscrapers of New York. This style was the party line for over 20 years, and anyone practicing constructivism was pushed out of practice or forced to comply. In 1931, constructivism was denounced as formalist nonsense. As constructivism began with a monument to the World Revolution, it ended with the competition for the Palace of Soviets, perhaps a symbolic recognition that the World Revolution would be put on hold in order to focus on socialism in one country.
Pause.
By the end of World War II,
so he this is all he says about the competition. I just want to say a little bit based on what I remember from like a full lecture where I was actually shown all of the different entries. Corbusier did an entry. Basically every modern architect, no matter what nationality, put in a proposal for this. And so the forms were all very various, all of course modernist of various types. And it was kind of a signal that, Stalin's going to get his way and more conservative socialism is taking hold, at least for 20 years. With like this was like the winner, or rather, all the other entries were shelved, and then the state, or the Politburo, put forward its own design. And something about the history, and this was like this is the context that the lecture is put in, that the site for this was a former cathedral on the river in Moscow.
Oh.
And throughout the entire span of the USSR, that site was always empty. Similar to Troy City Hall. Since for 20 years it's sat empty.
Oh, really?
Or at least 20 years. Maybe it's been 15, but it's been a while. But it's been this very lucrative developmental property, but every proposal to fill it has not worked out, either because of the financing or some kind of like asshole gets involved. But anyway, so the Palace of Soviets was never built because the state just would rather spend its money on defense and actually housing other people, or whatever other needs that were present. So having a more grandiose project like this, with a big statue of Lenin on it, low priority. And as soon as the USSR collapses, the site, basically a complete reproduction of the cathedral that used to be there, was built, almost with this kind of like, so Soviet Union didn't even happen, or something like that, or rather, or at least it's full circle. That like, at least this is how the professor kind of thought about it. That like this was like a long disruption to Russian history, or at least Orthodox Russian, the identity of Russia, instead of being subsumed and being, internationalist, by saying like, look, we're not just Russia, we're also all these other republics.
Right.
Of course, culturally speaking, that's not totally the case, but it's still improvement over the, USA. And if you're not USA, if you're not pro-American, get out.
Get out of here. Yep.
Get out of here.
So that cathedral that was rebuilt, does that actually function as a cathedral now, or was that just a statement
I think so.
that they were making? Oh, interesting.
Well, it can be both.
Sure.
Just as
That's true. Very true.
Just as the Palace of the Soviets was like going to be like the big museum,
right?
Though there probably is a museum. There was always many museums to the revolution, in the Soviet Union, and many tourists went there and wrote books about them. So they didn't really need another one, but maybe it was going to be like the big one. But again, other things were more important. And it's not like you got to get private investment to build a vanity project like this. But that's what it kind of turned into. Because all the other designs for the Palace of the Soviets were they were not this big or extravagant. They were more sensible, interesting, utilitarian, as well as just like a creative art museum.
Sure.
Like the kinds that are built across the world.
Yeah, it's curious.
Your Guggenheim Bilbao.
Yeah.
And if that was if they won out, but again, yes, you can blame Stalin for this, or whatever conservative undercurrent kind of took hold in the 30s, because they needed to prepare for war. A, B, industrialization comes first. They had to industrialize as fast as possible, and that has its human and other costs.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's either that or die.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Like everyone dies instead of
absolutely.
Yeah, it's we can talk about Stalin's war crimes all day. Like I saw it.
I would rather not, but
yeah. We don't. But I saw like this book in the library called like Stalin's War, like Hitler's War, and I think the whole point was like to make the case that like no, it was actually Stalin's fault that World War II happened.
Wait, what? What? Okay.
That was
all right.
What the book packet said. Or at least it was like two to tango. They both caused it.
Okay.
Molotov-Ribbentrop. Hey, if there wasn't Molotov-Ribbentrop, Hitler wouldn't have invaded Poland, and it would have just
Sure.
stopped at Czechoslovakia.
Right.
But that's not what any of the Nazis' documents said.
Of course not.
This person went through all the Stalin administration's documents and kind of came to a conclusion that like they weren't preventing the war. It's like, well, yeah, they wanted to fight the Nazis. They wanted to fight fascism. They knew it would come to it, but I don't know. There's a debate between inevitability, fate, destiny, whatever.
Sure.
Let's continue.
Soviet planners were getting tired of this style. In the 1950s, with the new leadership of Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet Union was starting to thaw from the steel grip of the guy who personally marched into Berlin and killed Hitler. Along with the promise to provide every Soviet citizen with quality housing, Khrushchev and party officials saw an opportunity to develop a new architecture to be used as a weapon for the amelioration of the welfare of the working people. They started a project to build millions and millions of square footage of housing using tipizatsiya, a sort of Lego-style prefabrication that the tight budget demanded. The result is the huge concrete housing blocks which the Soviet Union has come to be known for. For a few years, there was an ideological upheaval where architects hotly debated the merits of their predecessors. They even started to wonder why constructivism was so rigorously condemned and erased from the canon. And while there's no sense in relitigating the Cold War here, we should remember that people who lived in these new housing buildings paid about 5% of their income to do so. JFK gave this speech in October 1962 at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was basically the result of a botched invasion of Cuba by the United States that brought America and Russia to a nuclear standoff. But what also happened in 1962 was a curious reversal in the world of architecture. JFK's administration released the Guiding Principles for Federal Architecture, a brief manifesto that attempted to define a style that was distinguished and that would reflect the dignity, enterprise, vigor, and stability of the American national government. Kennedy's New Frontier program and LBJ's Great Society after him greatly expanded social services in the 1960s. The federal government's employment and budget ballooned over the coming decade as hundreds and hundreds of civic buildings were plopped in cities all around the country, and they were done so with raw concrete monumentality. At the same time, the Soviet Union's Central Committee set the new party line on architecture, doing away with the stale neoclassical style. Decades of experimentation followed as Russia and the federations within the Eastern Bloc explored their own brand of socialist modernism, and a lot of it ended up being pretty brutal. So even though Soviet brutalism took a bit longer to take off, it was a perfect boogeyman for America. As distrust for the government began to rise with the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal, these colossal structures came to represent all the evil the government is capable of in the wrong hands. And with Reagan in the 80s, they came to represent the crumbling social safety net of neoliberalism. The visual austerity of brutalism may have paved the way for economic austerity as social services became more and more demonized.
We know big government does not have all the answers. We know there's not a program for every problem.
The early brutalists may have had heroic and utopian intentions, but an artist's intentions rarely matter, especially when they don't come true. The Soviets ultimately decided that their cities were socialist because of where they were, not because of what they looked like. And in America, you can put as much glitter and ribbons on capitalism as you want.
There's a bit of lag. So the line just said there that what made the Soviet Union decided that made their architecture socialist was where it was, not what it looked like.
Right.
Which is a pretty interesting and good point.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely,
as he's been pointing out, it's all the same, or it's all the same because artistic currents aren't really independent. Sorry, they actually are more independent of ideology, and they're more of like the zeitgeist of the times, referring to the Cold War as a whole. That the Soviet Union and the American empires were not like they were different in their priorities and maybe where they started and what they were about, but they're both existing as modern nation states that are rivals of each other.
Right.
Similar to now it's the rising China and the aging, bloated American empire. Yeah, and you have something very similar happening there, where all the new architecture just is all the same because it's the same firms are designing in all countries. They're being hired by whoever pays, and that's kind of, you mentioned, like, the artist's intention rarely matters because it's the art depends on who's paying. In the Renaissance, it was these princes, and the British Empire is paying for it. Other nation states or corporations are paying for it. Billionaires, whatever. It's who's paying, and that's kind of where I got into, like, I got over this whole, like, artist as influencer or change artist, or I can change the world with my architecture. No, the economics is what matters, and that's a pretty Marxist take. It's a base take of, like, it's the conditions that matter, not the conditions kind of define what the art is as well.
That's true.
So it's not the artist that defines the conditions. Definitely not. So I kind of need to change the economics before you change architecture for the better. At least that's why I got into politics instead of working as hard as possible on getting in the industry, because I knew that if I was there, I would be working totally at the whims of the market or a state client.
Right.
So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely so. You can have amazing ideas and want to bring them into the world, but if you don't find a buyer who's buying those ideas, then they just stay ideas. So yeah, I can definitely see what you say, that you do have to mold your architectural style to whatever is being bought right now, whoever the buyer is. That makes a lot of sense. Hadn't thought about it that way before, but that makes perfect sense.
So yeah, I have another. Do I have it in? Play the video, and I'll have something.
Sure.
Oh yeah. Okay. Here's a. Can you share my screen again?
Yeah.
Full screen. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the architecture school one. So, but you see, like, the whole, like, you go from first year and you get more ostentatious or interesting, and then after graduation, bathroom. But there's another.
That's good.
Where's that? Oh, okay, here's the one I want. So there's the original design that is, like, pretty cool looking, and then you meet with a client, and then after the working drawings, and then it's constructed, and it all ends up as boxes.
Yep. Yeah, you know what? Come to think of it, as a landscaper, who I do a lot of design now for my company, I run into the same thing all the time. Like, I can have these fantastical ideas of, incorporating native plants here and there and all this different stuff, but if the client is like, no, I just want color right now, and it doesn't fit with my plan, then guess whose plan gets scrapped? It's mine. So, yeah.
So the picture being shared now is a meme of, like, the top one is what a firm designed for a corner block, and then each one is through the design process with the clients. So it's like, why is everything so bland and ugly or boring? It's the client who doesn't want to paint anything, doesn't want any detailing.
Doesn't want to pay for any extras or even necessarily any durability to the materials used. They probably just want to get it slapped up and sold as fast as possible. So that's a very good point. So John Tickler here says, or probably Teichler, not quite sure on that, so correct me if I'm mispronouncing it, please. Commercialism forms the third aesthetically degrading factor of the present age, but is a parallel evil of different origin and nature. Instead of vitiating honest efforts at self-expression, as do decadence and social propagandism, It simply removes human energy altogether from the field of honest let me turn that off for just one second. Where was I there? From the field of honest expression, and shackles it to a greedy and aesthetically and intellectually dishonest sort of charlatanry, having no connection with connection. So that's with an X there, with art. It is an older disease that chaotic decadence and systemic propagandism and will persist as long as bourgeois capitalism remains a factor to be coped with. H.P. Lovecraft in a letter to C.L. Moore, February 7th, 1937. Interesting.
Yeah. He was probably talking about his literature, but obviously it goes to any art form.
Yeah, absolutely so.
So I got a call that if you the next video, you can pick any of the ones that I sent you, but if you could do one of them and cover it your normal way, I'm going to leave for about 15.
Sure.
I need to do some chore. That's kind of I should do it now and not after the stream, or the stream should end early. But if I do it now, I can go as long as you can go. So
No
I'll be
problem.
back in 15. Okay.
See you then.
You're gonna, yeah.
All right, so we're just going to continue on. We'll finish out this video here and then move on to the next one. There's only a couple minutes left.
It's still going to be capitalism. So whether you're designing a palace of heavy industry for the only client in town, or shopping your postmodern behemoth to the highest corporate bidder, it's important to keep sight of the power and politics behind how the world around us looks. Because if we're not careful, we might get stuck with something much more stupid. So let me know what your city is doing to ameliorate the welfare of the working class. Or if you just think workers' clubs and communal housing are cool.
If you're talking about my city, St. Paul, it's demolishing homeless encampments time and time again. That's one of the main things they like to do to to deal with the problem of homelessness. So, in other words, nothing. They're very cruel about the way they deal with the lowest class of people in America. Yeah. They have put up a housing project recently, which supposedly is low income. I haven't really looked into it, but they're not making a huge effort. They're definitely not keeping up with housing demand. That's for sure. So there's my city.
Or if you're an anarchist. Thank you to those who sent in examples of your city's thickest administration buildings. And as always, thank you to the people on Patreon.
So there you go. That's the end of that one. Yeah. Very right, John. Yet put up no housing. I'm going to pull that aside for 1 second while we queue up the next video. Let me just find that here. I think, let's do Earthship homes. That sounds like an interesting one. Kind of a crossover between some permaculture ideas and urbanism, as well as potentially some leftist ideas. I don't know. I haven't seen this one yet, so we'll put that right in, and we'll check that out. Oh, come on. There we go.
Sponsored by Privacy.com. Renewable energy and EVs are just a few pieces of the puzzle for achieving net zero living. But what if we could combine eco-friendly building materials, energy efficiency, and sustainability, like a passive house, but being heated and cooled by the ground without relying on the electrical grid? It's time.
So thinking back to some of the permaculture streams that we've done, let's bring back up the idea of geothermal and passive heating. So again, passive heating is when you just have windows oriented in the right way. That means usually if you're in the northern hemisphere, at least in the temperate zones out of the tropics, you're going to orient them towards the south. If you're in the tropics, it doesn't matter as much which way you enter orient them because the sun doesn't change its position relative to you all that much during the year. And then if you're in the southern hemisphere, of course, you orient most of your windows towards the north, and then the idea being that you're going to get that solar gain. Sun comes in, literally it's the greenhouse effect within your home. So the light penetrates the windows, it gets absorbed by things which then re-radiate that energy as heat, and a portion of that heat gets trapped on the windows and then keeps your building a lot more warm in the wintertime. And you can orient it in a way so that the rays are coming at a 90-degree angle when it's the coldest part of the year, so you're getting maximum solar penetration into the house. And then you can have things like awnings that when it's the hotter part of the year, the steep angle of the sun doesn't even make it to shining right on the windows directly. You can orient it that way, and then that produces a little bit of a cooling effect relative to what you otherwise would have. And then, of course, geothermal is taking advantage of the pretty constant temperature of the Earth. And so you either pump liquids or air down into the Earth. It then heats up or cools depending on what you are, what the surface level conditions are. So in the summertime, it's going to be cooling down to, 50 degrees or whatever. And in the wintertime, it's going to be warming up to 50 degrees from whatever the outside temperature may be. And using that thermal gain from the Earth itself to reduce heating and cooling. And those are two strategies that I favor most of all when it comes to planning and building new urban infrastructure, because they actually reduce your need for energy. It's not just replacing a dirty fuel source with a clean one. It's actually overall reducing your need for more energy. Yeah, live underground. Live underground is a good point too. There can be some issues if you're completely underground. It tends to produce a lot of humidity. But something like the Hobbit house from the Lord of the Rings, you have just one face of your building exposed to the outside, and the rest of it sheltered in earth. Yeah, that's a great way to take advantage of that natural heating and cooling of the earth. And when it comes down to it, we need to reduce the amount of energy we use overall, rather than just switch out where it's coming from. So earlier you had said, John, and I had missed that comment, a victim blaming the poor for the failure of capitalism. Marx addresses the same thing in Das Kapital. And yeah, we'll get to Das Kapital eventually. That's going to be a long one to get through, but not for a while. I want to get a few more books under my belt before we tackle something quite that big. But yeah, that's capitalism's MO all the time. If you're poor, it's because you're lazy or dumb or just aren't taking advantage of all the opportunities out there. And if you're rich, it's because the opposite. You're just smart and all that stuff. So yeah, capitalism definitely does that. All right, looks like Dan is ready.
I'm back.
Yeah, so I pulled up the one about Earthships
Yeah,
and
I know.
off-grid living and stuff like that. So
Yeah, so I picked two things that kind of overlap with solar punk.
yeah,
Since we're both very much into that. Although
definitely.
it's not, I mean, it's definitely punk enough, and it basically kind of should be what's pictured when one thinks solar punk, the Earthship, the eco village. So,
Yeah. Well, it's very DIY. It's very,
Yeah.
reusing what otherwise is waste. So that
Yeah.
factors in with permaculture principles quite a lot. So yeah, I totally see that.
Time to get on board an Earthship. It's a house, not an actual ship. What are they? Where can they be built? And are they even worth it? I'm Matt Farrell. Welcome to Undecided.
He's undecided.
There's a lot of focus on getting solar
Crowd
panels for your
centers.
home or buying an EV to go net zero and save money in the long run. But that's only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Finding ways to reduce our energy use and live more sustainably is just as important, like building a net zero or passive home, or using smart technologies to optimize how and when things inside your home actually use energy. I've done several videos on various aspects of these concepts already, but just like the passive house standard, there's another building technique that doesn't get as much attention. Now, while I don't personally see myself building or living in an Earthship, which sounds like something that should be traveling the galaxy, I find myself endlessly fascinated by the approach and how some of these principles can apply back to more traditional, mainstream approaches. Now, in the construction sector, sustainable buildings like passive homes and green buildings are gaining traction and are an important solution for a low-carbon future, combined with renewables, EVs, and battery storage. Now, these homes naturally reduce carbon emissions from heating and cooling, which is a very good thing, especially when you consider that heating and cooling accounts for 51% of the total energy use in the US. Even though green buildings and passive house designs have a positive impact, for the most part, they still rely on the electrical grid and public utilities, which, depending on where you live, isn't as reliable as it should be. But what about an approach that could pull together energy efficiency, upcycled materials, and even food production and cooling from the Earth itself, combined with off-grid living, and potentially do it for less money than something like a passive house? Enter Earthships.
Now
that's built with eco-home build.
And that's kind of like the craw with a lot of these eco-villages or these concepts like the Earthship, is that they are dependent on being off the grid, that they are not going to be allowed / possible in urban environments. So like I would like to try to adapt the Earthship kind of technologies to like a brownstone. And there are a few examples of what that is like, and I have like drawings, and now I'm making my own drawings kind of of doing that. So like you said, kind of taking the concepts and putting them into more of a functional urban fabric, where you can't just build however you want facing the south or the right exposure, and other such things. You have to adapt your building to the conditions you have, and that's part of the challenge of design as well as the fun of it. It's sort of like their problems they're solving are more the problems of how to get the materials out to the middle of nowhere where you can build whatever you want. And but it's also kind of it's a double-edged sword of like, if I want to do a workshop with these guys or learn how to do an Earth house, I have to travel to the middle of nowhere, New Mexico, to visit, even just to see this place. Which is the same with Arco Santi and other such places. Why can't they just be? I mean, there was a place in Rhode Island called Revive the Roots, but that wasn't like a eco village. It was more of a farming project, permaculture project. You can do those anywhere. But which is why it's more useful videos to do that than this stuff, which is really dependent on even having a lot of know-how to begin with, like how to work a cement mixer or whatever. Because I can't imagine commissioning a contractor or subcontractor. Maybe you could hire a subcontractor to do parts of the building that you don't understand yourself, like the electricity. But otherwise, I can't imagine like commissioning a contractor to build this. They would not know where the hell to start, because like most of it's a free economy, but when it comes to doing stuff, there's really quite like a conformist culture of like, this is how we do it. We use, you pick. It's like being in like the kind of restaurant where it's like pick your entree, and it's just these 5 entrees, and then you have the choice of 2 desserts, and that's it. It's like that's your menu of options when you're building a house. And all the options suck, or they're super expensive. Like it's kind of terrible that for decades now it's kind of been there's been a push of sorts to kind of build with more wood because it's more sustainable. Sort of renewable material, and a lot less energy to process and make wood materials than it is to make cement, concrete, masonry. Do metals. And yet I wonder now with the cost efficiency that building with wood seems to be as expensive or more so than if you were to build something out of aluminum. Yeah, it's gotten, but that's just, is it a temporary spike in prices, or is it going to stay there?
Yeah, who knows? But I don't really see any reason why you couldn't, like, if you had enough people behind it, why you couldn't just redo building codes locally to accommodate these sorts of things, and building with cob and these alternative materials and stuff like that. I mean, there have been places that I can think of where they've gotten it so that you can do like hay bale construction and that sort of thing. So it seems like it's possible you could at least.
Yeah, it depends on the kind of regulatory regime you got in
True.
the town/city. Like the bigger the city, the more maybe precise the rules are going to be. Where it's like, no, it's actually these 4 things that are allowed versus these are the 4 things that aren't allowed. Or to have codes that are more like criteria, you need this, this, and this, otherwise you can make it however you want. But or it's more like you have to use approved materials, and these are the materials that are approved by the construction industry, and the construction industry is pretty much a de facto cartel.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they may really have the ear of the elected officials and donate heavily to their campaigns. In fact, likely they do. So it definitely could be.
Or they are the elected officials.
Or they are the elected officials as well. That's definitely also true.
I mean, how many representatives are basically like former like real estate developers?
Sure.
There's quite a number.
Absolutely good point. Yep. All right. Well, let's move on a little bit here.
Building materials, Earthships offer comfortable, energy efficient, and cozy living spaces without relying on public utilities. Now, I've been drawn to solar power and battery storage in my grid-tied system to try to reduce my dependence on the grid, but not to cut it out altogether. Now, this, on the other hand, takes this thing to a whole nother level. It all started in the 1970s in New Mexico with the architect Michael Reynolds. He proposed the inclusion of bioecological features like beer cans, old tires, and bottles into his designs, which was very curious at the time, and even today. Earthships can be boiled down to 6 basic design principles. The first is building with natural and repurposed materials. Some of these materials are available in abundance worldwide. In the US, for example, about 290 million tires were scrapped in 2003. That's just 1 year. Now, most of that is chopped up and burned, recycled into other products, or burned in landfills. But there are millions of tires stockpiled every single year, so you can get some of them for very cheap, or sometimes for free. And when they're used in earthship construction, old tires are used as bricks. They're filled with earth that's pounded to create very strong exterior walls and load-bearing interior walls. They have a much higher thermal mass than traditional construction. A study by the Colorado School of Mines showed an R value of 40 for a tire bale wall. That's 3 times as much insulation as a standard 4-inch stud wall. Other materials such as cans and bottles are optional, but they can be used as a main material to construct interior walls, which are then plastered. The second principle is thermal solar heating and cooling. Earthships naturally heat and cool themselves, so they don't require electric heat, fossil fuels, or wood, but that depends on where you live, which I'll get to in a little bit. The tires, which I already mentioned, are known as bricks, which weigh 300 pounds packed with soil. That incredible thermal mass isn't just a good insulator, but it can store heat or cold. The basic idea behind heating and cooling an Earthship is to surround each living space with those thermal mass bricks on the east, north, and west sides. On the southern-facing side, you line that wall with windows. The sun shines through the glass, warming the mass of the floors and walls. When the sun goes down and the air temperature drops below the temperature of the walls, heat flows from the walls and the floor into the living space. It's the same passive solar principle that's used in passive home design. Now for cooling, there are cooling tubes fed through the thermal mass surrounding the building. As warmer air is pulled into the building through those tubes, the heat is wicked away, providing cooled air to the inside of the building. The third design principle is solar and wind energy. Earthships produce their own renewable energy through solar panels and wind turbines. And this part, I'm sure you're very familiar with, but they're able to provide power to appliances from solar and wind generation, combined with charge controllers, inverters, and batteries to store the excess energy for a consistent power 24 hours a day. But as you already know, solar panel and wind generation systems like this can be expensive. So to make it more affordable with a smaller energy generator build-out, you typically pair this with super energy efficient appliances like pumps, lighting, and refrigerators. Together with natural cooling and heating to reduce the power demand, Earthships only require about 25% of the electricity consumed by a traditional home. The fourth design principle is water harvesting, and this is one I'm actually interested in for myself. To further improve sustainability, Earthships collect and store rainwater and snowmelt in cisterns.
Go for it.
This is over and over again when it comes to an answer, or it's the answer to talking about how, say, certain renewable technologies are also very high tech, very energy and resource intensive. Having to exploit South America for lithium to build electric cars. This is because a car is still using the same amount of energy that a gas car does. We're just trying to replace what we use for
One for
cheap
one.
fuels and trying to do it with not cheap fuels.
Right.
With the house, you kind of saw that proportion that you make a house efficient enough with passive design, and passive design includes, like, say, having a root cellar, so that you only need a freezer or a fridge for ice cream. You only have to cool the ice cream or certain items. So otherwise you have a space that is cool and dry. And so you don't need as much energy. You don't need this high-end, high energy sucking refrigerator that's double the size of what something like, say, your grandma had.
Yeah.
And so in all, the house can use 25 to 20% of the energy of a standard house. And so you do only need 2 PV panels to power everything.
Yeah, definitely.
And we have to multiply that millions of times to get to the real energy efficiency, where we just do not need as much power, and that offshore wind farm would be enough, and that's all you have to build. But we have to kind of put a cap on, like, this is how much energy that a house or company is allowed to use, kind of thing. And thus, if we're going to use market mechanisms anyway, for everyone to figure out how they're going to actually make to use less energy, instead of just this voluntary, like, oh, maybe we'll reduce 20% of our use and we'll get there 2050. It's just assuming that these mass technologies, and we won't have to actually redesign anything or put in the work, because it's just, everyone has to be a pseudo expert or at least know about this stuff. But that's part of the education.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say. Hopefully it'll come back to me. We'll just move on for now. Oh yeah, I remember now. I'd be interested to know if anyone's tried to apply these sorts of building techniques to more of a multifamily sort of a situation, where it would be more feasible to do in the city then. Because if you're going to do a larger scale project, maybe it would then be worth the effort to tie in all these different systems. There
is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multifamilies that do passive design. Though some designs are, like, say, they're built into a hillside and they're mostly just multiple houses that are kind of just they're closer together. Similarly, there are earthship designs that they've been doing where it's like a 4-bedroom house. So it is like multifamily as far as the number of people that can be in this. Like, how long some of these things are. They're still long and thin, but you just stack up the long and thin, lot by lot. It's like changing the orientation of the lots and the orientation of the houses. Instead of being like the short side facing south, it's the long side. So you need, and this is what cities used to be laid out this way, where the streets were laid out so that all the houses had their long side facing south. And these are Greek and Roman cities.
They don't do that a lot in Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's the long streets are almost always the north and south running ones, which I always found frustrating and annoying. And I think the reason they do that, at least in Minnesota, is because then you get the most intense sun to melt as much of the street ice and snow as possible. So you get that sort of solar gain that way. But at the expense of all the houses. So.
Of heating the houses where people actually live. So it's just another example of putting cities that are oriented towards cars and not people.
Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely have to reframe the way you look at cities and ask if they're for people or if they're for.
Hell, just fuck. In Northeast, cities are spending millions and millions on a year. We spend everything needed to plow all of the major streets and to make sure people can drive to work and drive around. But then everyone's walks and sidewalks are left unplowed. and no one can actually walk around. The elderly can't walk anywhere. They can't get in and out. Everyone's left up to their own devices. Plow out their own driveway, and it's just an on your own mentality until you get to that public street, and then that will be plowed. But to me, it's like so much resource use. So when thinking about like the entire,
absolutely,
all of the paved area that we have, and how it's all going to be plowed, it's like why not just take a week off? When there's a blizzard, it's like that's our vacation week. Everyone has their vacation week now. Just like with the pandemic, it's going to cost more to have the economy open than to close it. In terms of lives, in terms of like the hassle.
Sure. Or just break out the cross country skis and snowmobiles.
That's what I would do.
But all right, let's keep going.
To supply all their demand. There's a great YouTube channel, Handyman, who lives in Arizona and has done this exact thing. A few weeks of rain during the rainy season in Arizona, and he's got water for the rest of the year. Water from the cistern has to be pumped through a filtering system to treat the water, but you can also use a solar water heater for hot water and use a pressure tank to regulate the water pressure. The fifth design principle is contained sewage treatment. And who doesn't like talking about sewage? Trust me, this is not going to be gross. It's all about reusing water to not let anything go to waste. And no, I'm not talking about having to take a bath in toilet water, but the water that's left over after washing the dishes, doing the laundry, or taking a bath. This type of water is known as gray water. It's basically used water that doesn't have any fecal contamination in it. You can use gray water to feed interior botanical cells where plants naturally treat the water until it's clean enough to be pumped and used for toilet flushing. When you're talking about 40% of typical water use in a house getting flushed down the toilet, this can be a significant savings in water usage. Gray water reuse is standard practice aboard the space station. For water that gets flushed down the toilet in an Earthship, it flows into a standard septic tank and leach field, but you can also add a line out that overflows into an exterior rubber-lined botanical cell, taking advantage of the rich nutrients, shall we say, that are contained in the isolated cell for exterior decoration plants. Which leads me to the last design principle, food production. One of the more recent experiments by Michael Reynolds' company, Earthship Biotexture, is the use of interior gray water botanical cells for food production, and taking all of that wastewater to grow things inside the building. In Taos, New Mexico, the Earthship Visitor Center features things like herbs, peppers, tomatoes, kale, beets, and cucumbers. Again, this is all tapping back into that same concept of reusing and maximizing efficiency of every single system in the home. There are several pros that make the Earthship concept attractive. They're highly efficient buildings and don't rely on the power grid. Water is collected, filtered, stored, and reused many times, and for several different kinds of uses. And in addition, the Earthships are made of natural recycled materials that require no HVAC systems, sort of, and provide organic food that's healthy for people. But is all this sunshine and rainbows? Well, let's start with the great question that usually comes up around Earthships, and one I've hinted at a couple times. Can they be built anywhere? Well, cooler and more humid environments like the American Northeast and Canada can make it extremely challenging. In general, an Earthship operates best in temperate or hot environments with regular rainfall over 50 inches per year and a humidity less than 60%. Orientation is also vital, which might make certain locations impossible. A rule of thumb is to face windows to the southwest if you need more heat, and southeast if more cooling is needed. And water tanks should be placed on the northwest if you build an Earthship in a cold climate to prevent them from freezing, and in the northeast in a hot climate to prevent overheating. Now, Earthships in a very cold climate have divergent opinions. Now, although Reynolds has modified some of his Earthship plans to make them better suited for the cold, his buildings don't have heat pumps to extract heat from the ground. In Canada, for example, the ground temperature is below 7 degrees in the winter, so keeping the inside warm gets a lot harder. Again, it's not impossible, but takes modifications to keep it warm. There are a few Earthships I found in the New England area that had to integrate some form of traditional heating system for certain times of the year. Another problem of the Earthship self-sustainability is that homeowners can't grow all the essential food that they want because some food is impossible to grow inside the Earthship. Even more important, some residents might not have the necessary farming experience. I know I don't. And regarding water collection, it's hard to have enough rainwater volume in some arid climates. I mentioned that YouTuber from Arizona. Well, he's able to do it with a fairly sizable rainwater harvesting system, but that may not be the case everywhere. Earthships also accumulate water in the wall surfaces, which might lead to the formation of molds and algae. and the tires used in the walls can break down and expel gases into an enclosed space, which could be harmful to the inhabitants. And then there's the costs. But there are a lot of factors that affect how much it will cost to build. But before I get into those costs, let's take a quick moment to talk about a great way to keep your personal costs and spending in line, all while protecting yourself with today's sponsor, Privacy. Now, I've been using Privacy's free service for a while now, and I absolutely love it. How many?
Yeah, so like the cost issue is kind of part of like how it's still a house, and it's not, the Earthship is not like a solution to the kind of affordability question where like say a tiny house or a micro house is like, oh, this only costs 10 grand. An Earthship is not going to cost, a fraction of what a standard house. It's probably going to cost maybe 70 to 80% of the cost. 80,000 to 100,000 or something. But of course, I'm thinking about like a Habitat for Humanity house that costs 100,000 to build, and that's with all the volunteer labor and other things that they kind of take shortcuts on. What was the other thing? Oh yeah, I want to point out that water with shit that does have fecal contamination, it's called black water. I don't know why he left that out. Yeah, there's gray and then black water. So if it's black, that means it's shit. Yeah. It just takes a lot more to clean it, but you can clean it.
No, yeah, it's definitely possible. They're living machines that you can put them through, and it's like.
But there's questions of like how to convert maybe an urban house to do all of this stuff. If you do have a yard and you have space around the house, then of course you can kind of install a cistern here, or your kind of rain garden here. Just change where the where your drains go, or so on, or hire a plumber to kind of install maybe a second kind of line for the gray water to go down from your sink. Otherwise, I haven't seen a lot of that in action, but it's certainly something I'd be interested in exploring if I ever do get in the field, so to speak. It's just such a topic of like what field to go into.
Yeah, I'm definitely very interested in that as well. My thought for like more apartment style living would be to kind of orient a building in more or less a U shape, and have the open part be the part facing south. So you get that solar gain, and then kind of glass in that entire courtyard. Of course, that's a huge expense that you're going to add to it, but perhaps over the life of the building, it could end up paying for itself in the solar gains, and then also the space for growing food and perhaps even doing sewage. But
that's not a new idea. I mean, there are tons of projects that basically have that scheme. If they're not a U shape, they are an H, or they're a tower, and they basically like have a middle part that's the greenhouse. Because all you need is some centrally located hot zone, or a place that gathers heat. Then, anything you can do with a house, you can apply to a multi-unit building. Really. Tiny house at 10 grand. Oh yeah, well, when it's pre-made and it's on the market, tiny houses are not the cheapest option, oddly enough. But the point is that they should be. And that's kind of where tiny homes or any kind of aesthetic crazes are just fads, in that it's like they're luxury tiny homes where it's like it's the lifestyle of minimalism, but it's sold at 70, 80 grand or the cost of a normal sized house. Right. Or something like that. Originally, at least when I first encountered it back in 2009, a tiny house was like, shed, but with, or a trailer, but kind of more, I don't know, intentional design aspects to it. But otherwise it is like trailer living, but for the bourgeois.
Yep.
Yeah, 10 grand gets you the materials. I think, that's a good point, Natalie. Because it's assumed mostly that a tiny house is put together by you. and thus like they're the kits that make it very simple, or at least attempt to. You buy tiny houses in kits, or you design it yourself, or you do it. I don't know. It is like it's punk. It's do it yourself, and that's what makes it cheap. When you take the labor costs out, but as material costs get more and more, it's not going to just be, oh, the labor is what costs the most when it comes to construction. It seems to be it's going to be everything, but that's more like that's the world that we are coming into, the world of climate chaos, where we're not going to have the global the accessibility to all of these different technologies and materials at a whim, as long as you have the cash in your pocket. Cash isn't going to be enough, or it will only be enough if you have millions of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Good point. All right, let's continue on here.
A service that shall remain unnamed. Well, with privacy, quick and easy it is to get a single-use card. Head over to privacy.com/Matt Farrell to sign up for a free account, and as a spin up now. Thanks to privacy.com, the land, Earthships cost and back to the cost of building an Earthship house. While a conventional house costs about $100 to $150 per square foot on average, not including the cost of the land, Earthships cost between $150 and $225 per square foot, which is considerably more expensive. But their cost is not that different from passive homes, which ranges from $166 to $231 per square foot, which I covered in my passive house video. The price of labor is usually one of the highest expenses when building an Earthship, since it requires more unique building methods. Now, if you're going to do the labor yourself, it's obviously going to cost a lot less per square foot, but imagine placing all of those tires, compacting them with dirt to make all those walls. Placing one tire takes about 45 minutes to 1 hour, and you need to do hundreds of these. Doing this yourself is definitely an option, just not for the masses. Also, due to their unusual design, an architect or engineer with experience and knowledge.
Well, unless you do it like a barn raising. Well, the idea is that all of these are being built by a large group of people.
Mm-hmm.
They're not built by a single individual. I mean, no construction is, unless it is one person working for 20 years on one house. But yeah, it's like a barn raising. It's a community. You got to think like community and not just an individual consumer when it comes to these things.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's a really nice one right there on screen.
That is very pretty. I like that a lot.
What was I thinking there? And just a point about the passive homes and Earthships, like, yeah, they cost more at the outset, but similar to most renewable or any other technologies, they cost more at first, but then the maintenance is so much lower. Mm-hmm. You know, the heating and cooling costs, you know, you're not paying those $100, $200 bills every month. You're paying nothing, or $20, or just for the water, and if you need a water hookup. So it makes the building cheaper in the long haul, especially like 100 years, or whatever, a lifetime.
It's the same sort of thing as the permaculture strategy of doing a whole lot of stuff right up front, and then just as time goes on, having to do less and less, and reaping those early labor's rewards.
Yeah, because you have these people, like, say maybe they get like a house for bargain, but then they have to basically renovate every 20 years and plop down 50 grand or get a new mortgage. And then they're always in credit, or they're retired, and this is the house they were supposed to retire in, but they have to keep working because there's just more stuff to fix, because it's just everything's made to break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely so. Yeah, so it's long-term versus short-term thinking.
Required and can be expensive. There can also be issues with modern building codes and permits that can come up. Excavation to grade and level the site and provide a solid foundation also brings up considerable costs, not to mention all the soil that's needed for the walls. But there are plenty of examples of Earthships out in the world. In Taos, where Earthships are born, there's a 600+ acre Earthship community which has space for 130 homes. Far from Taos, we have the Brighton Earthship in the UK. It was built in 2007 by Earthship Biotecture and the Low Carbon Trust, and it serves as a community center for Stanmar Organics. In Alberta, Canada, the 1,800 square foot Kinney Earthship was built with more than 12,000 cans and 800 tires. Mike Reynolds carried out this project for a whole summer. He brought a dozen workers and 30 volunteers from New Mexico to help complete it. The Kenny Earthship produces all of its own electricity, grows much of the family's food, and recycles all gray water. And there are more Earthships in other parts of the world like Scotland, Nicaragua, South Africa, and more. I hope it didn't sound like I was kind of bagging on the concept of Earthships when I was going over the cons, but there are significant challenges to where you might want to build one. With other building techniques that can provide as energy efficient a home at the same cost with less restrictions, it kind of relegates Earthships to a more highly motivated, more niche option. And despite all of that, Earthships are a fascinating concept that has aspects that could be applied elsewhere. Things that not only benefit the environment, but also give you more independence and potentially save money over time with much lower energy requirements. It's another piece of that much larger puzzle. But what do you think? Do you have any interests in something like an Earthship? What elements do you think that make the most sense for wider adoption? Jump in the comments and let me know. If you like this video, be sure to check out one of the ones I've linked to right here. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you think.
Okay, so that's the idea of Earthships for you. So
Yeah, I thought I have a folder with just Earthships in it.
Cool.
No, I'm not seeing it in my catalog here.
That's
a
all
function.
right.
I think I have in functions. No. That's weird. Very weird.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So I think I have time for one more, maybe shorter or mid-length video, like maybe 20 minutes or less.
Okay, so how about we do the 3D printer one?
3D printer one? That sounds pretty
Yeah,
cool.
3D printed homes. So this is more like the debunking, shake our fist at kind of the state of the world and basically how our media structure works when it promotes new technology and gets everyone excited, but when really it's just kind of almost a big scam. Or at the very least, like this media promoting it lies. And it doesn't help that people are just reading, or most people's consumption is just
It may
the
look
headline.
like toothpaste, but this 3D printing technology is spitting out a 19...
So have you heard of the 3D printed house before?
I have, yeah. Basically, it's just instead of the plastics, the idea is that you put concrete in its place, right? That's the main difference.
Yeah. And it's kind of promoted, emphasis on from a PR, as like this hot new technology that is going to kind of solve affordability, or just one of the answers that's being promoted by the companies that are doing it, as well as producing it. But apparently there aren't that many printers actually being made. And if you want to do this, you have to rent or get the... Well, this video will go into it. So this is Belinda Carr again. It's yeah.
It may look like toothpaste, but this 3D printing technology is spitting out a 1,900 square foot house.
3D printed concrete homes are one of the hottest topics on social media right now. YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter are flooded with posts about 3D printed homes. This construction technique has millions of adoring fans across the world. Unfortunately, the space is littered with fake news and hyperbole and a lack of critique. Sounds
Fake
familiar?
news.
Some of the claims made by these tech companies and the media.
That
just
scam
make me
thing
wanna-
there. She was referring to container homes. She's gotten her channel
see
kind
that.
of got her channel grew a lot, and I noticed it when she covered like condoms, and how basically
Interesting.
if you really just don't, there's really no good application of reusing the containers
Yeah,
as a construction material unless you're deconstructing the box and using the corrugated metal as siding.
Gotcha.
Pretty much all it is.
Otherwise, it's just too much to re-engineer it because I mean they're not meant for living in. They're gonna have warping to the metal and the frame.
They're not structural. It's not structural. They're meant to be stacked, so the structure's in the corners,
Right.
nowhere else. They're meant to hold things. And the standard. So like she pointed out that like in order to sell this as something livable or even usable, you basically have to re-engineer the containers to be taller than they actually are. And so it's like you have to make material to sell the idea that you're reusing material.
Yeah.
So
That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate because it seems like such a cool idea, and like I mean,
and the printed homes are kind of the same. Mostly starting and ending with the fact that it's concrete, building walls out of concrete. It's just not efficient, not green, not anything. It's
right, because
it just looks cool, I guess, and that's why it has fans, and it's just
right.
Shake our fist at the dupes of the world.
Well, and too, concrete is meant to absorb pressure from above, and it does that very well, but it's not as much meant to be something to span.
What compressive
gaps.
force is a single ranch level house under?
Right.
None.
Yeah, there you go.
Some of the claims made by these tech companies and the media just make me want to. So in this video, we're going to analyze the claims made, not from a pessimistic point of view, but a realistic one, where we look at the advantages and the drawbacks of the technology. The first claim is that 3D printed homes can be built for less than $4,000. This is a flat-out lie that started circulating in 2018. Journalists misled people for the sake of clicks by claiming that Icon 3D, based in Austin, Texas, had a $10,000 tiny home prototype that could cost around $3,500 or $4,000 when printed in large quantities. Jared Gross, who runs a YouTube channel on 3D printed structures, interviewed the owners and the marketing team of Icon 3D. They categorically denied these claims. A lack of knowledge of the construction field is not an excuse to publish articles and videos with outrageous claims. The cost of 3D printed homes is a hotly debated topic because it is a new field with many unknown variables. Every company uses a different printer and a concrete mix, and no one has printed homes in large quantities. Icon 3D, Logan Architecture, and 3 Strands have teamed up to build 1,000 square foot houses with 2 bedrooms and 1.5 baths for $450,000 in Austin. Only
Notice
the
how most
first
of it's
floor
made
is
of
made of
wood.
3D printed concrete.
Yeah.
The upper floor has
Yeah, that's look at
points
all these
this-
trusses.
She points it out. I mean, she points it out. That's just
Yeah.
the first floor is printed, and then the rest is standard stick construction. Now, all of that can be modular, and there is kind of more of the. I kind of like the video. Again, it's a kitschy kind of Instagram video of these pre-made blocks that are, I think that's the better technology to look at.
Oh, so it's more or less 3D printed cinder blocks, then, right? Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
With the
Interesting.
insulation and all the vapor barrier in it, and you just construct the house by fitting these blocks together, and then you finish them.
That sounds like that makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
conventional stick framing. The idea that 3D printed homes are the cheapest option in every market across the world is simply untrue. Before the blip in lumber prices, stick framing was the cheapest option in the States. CMU block construction is the cheapest option in the Middle East, like the UAE. Steel or masonry bricks are the cheapest option in other areas. 3D printing can have lower labor costs, but there are other expenses to consider. The cost of electricity to run the machine, which is exorbitant in some countries, the cost of renting or buying the printer, and the cost of hiring specialists to calibrate and run the machine. The next false claim is that homes can be printed in 24 hours. 3D printers create walls, not homes. There are dozens of other components that go into building a house. Windows, doors, roofs, electrical wiring, plumbing, insulation,
that's not
HVAC
walls.
systems. Interior
I was just playing Tropico, and Tropico 5 has this option where you can have your leader give a speech, and I clicked the option to address housing, and she goes like, some people are like, it's living without roofs or walls. Well, I promise roof for some and walls for others.
That's good.
walls, finishes, millwork, etc. The 24-hour timeline also ignores the time taken to ship the machine, offload it, set it up, calibrate it, and dismantle it. Printing the first story of these homes.
Oh, I just had a thought. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I wonder if you're familiar with. I think they came up with this process to set up like army bases very quickly. But I heard about this technique of using concrete and then some sort of like balloon, and basically you make this big tent
Yeah.
almost, but it's like
Yeah, you
sealed,
have,
and then
you
you
make a
pour
balloon,
the
you
concrete
pour
on top of
concrete
it.
on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting one.
There's that's been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
50s and 60s maybe even. There's a lot of
Yeah,
concrete
yeah.
domes. A lot of concrete domes are made this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of one of the things that makes maybe concrete you need to build the mold that the concrete's going to go in. So
Right,
if
yeah.
it takes if there's an advantage to this technique of using the printer is that you don't need to build the wood molds, pour the concrete, wait for it to
Into it.
cure, and then remove the molds, which
Yeah,
takes
yeah.
you have to buy wood specifically for that.
Sure.
So if you don't have any wood and you need to use concrete, but then that's what CMU blocks are for. You pour the concrete before, and you make the pieces, and the CMU block is basically to make it transportable, and one person can carry one, but no more. So make a module of concrete. But yeah, like do you put down when you 3D print, like where's the shit, the skeleton, not the skeleton, but like the mesh that holds the concrete wall together.
Sure, yeah.
Because
yeah.
otherwise
Looks
it
like-
wouldn't just break apart over time. Because
Yeah.
basically concrete. So concrete can take compressive forces, but it cannot be in tension. As soon as something pulls on concrete, it cracks. Which is why rebar is put in to any concrete. And God, it's so much waste from the fact that rebar was put in without any rust proofing. So as soon as any amount of moisture, which does go through concrete, would rust the rebar inside, and that's why all American infrastructure has to be replaced, because if it was made of concrete, it was poured with this galvanized rebar, and it all broke apart. It's
seriously, what a waste.
Such a small mistake, but so much cost.
Huge consequences. Yeah.
Huge consequences. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it would seem to me too that doing this 3D printing of the concrete, you'd have to have basically all of the concrete on site and ready to go for that entire operation. Like it can't. It's not as though it could just stop and start.
Is it in a truck?
I wouldn't think. Yeah, so you have to have like trucks, tag teaming them each other as this goes on. So rather than just being able to like deliver a pallet of bricks or a pallet of blocks and stuff, everything has to be good to go right away.
Well, I don't know those details, and that's something the Instagram profiles or PR will never show. They'll never show the logistics involved in making the one-day house happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can keep going.
That's very true. Yeah, but John brought up the specs for concrete.
Yeah. Thank you.
200 psi tension, 5,900 psi compression. So yeah,
somebody's
difference.
Somebody's an engineer.
Yeah, there you go.
I have all the textbooks with that in it, but
cool.
In Austin took 5 to 7 days. A viral video from 2014 claimed that a Chinese company, Winson, printed 10 houses in 24 hours. A couple of facts are conveniently left out. They had 4 3D printers running, they printed just wall sections, and the houses were assembled by humans after the concrete had cured. The glass inserts and the roof were built by humans, and they have no plumbing. A
so
family
they
in France was
including the
first to move
curing
into a 3D printed
so
home
the concrete still has to cure.
Yeah.
They're not including that in the time.
Right? Yeah, that's pretty convenient.
Pretty convenient. It's just like it's just so stupid just for the clicks of just saying that it's miraculous, that it is just a day. But of course you could say, because it would be too long to say, oh, it took 7 days, when usually it takes 14 days. It took half the time. So you could make the headline, 3D printed house takes half the time.
Right.
There's still ways of making it sound impressive without blatantly lying.
Yep. But yeah, it also does. Yeah, it depends on
It's
what you
like it's
include
like
as
I was
time.
the thought came up of like games journalism of just like, because I don't know, they don't know anything about programming, so they have to take the game dev's word for it or something.
Yeah, they
But
just repeat it as though it's the
but
truth
again, as
without.
John Tinker points out, that like there's investment involved here. There's like it's
Mm-hmm.
more about priming the investment and the interest in investment, which is why it's like it got all these clicks on Instagram. Oh, it went viral. And even though, and yeah, like a portion of those people are like trading stocks on Robinhood or something. And they're going to see
Mm-hmm.
the company and like, oh, great, I want to help the world. I want like cheap
Yeah.
housing. It's only $4,000. I want that. I want
Yeah.
something like that to be available. So I need to invest in this. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a lie. It's not cheaper. It's not going to be available everywhere.
Right.
It's yeah. It's just for like some rich.
Bogus.
Yeah. It's bogus.
Yeah.
Keep going. Bogus, dude. Totally bogus. Actually, we watched
2017.
Bill and Ted's Face the Music.
Oh, how was that? I heard it was not too bad actually.
Well, I liked it. It's good,
Okay.
but it has some weaknesses. For
Well,
one
I mean-
thing, there's a side plot where they go to hell, and they really didn't have to do that.
Okay.
It was just to get Death back.
I
But
see.
why? It's supposed to be a new adventure, not like if you got to set up that the band broke up and Death went back to hell, then that's the reason. That's the right you wrote in why he's not in this movie, so not appearing in this film. But then they spend 20 minutes where everyone has to go, like they have to write in how they get to hell, so that Death is in the end.
Yeah.
And that's so like that time could have been spent doing something, I don't know what, but something else that maybe explores what the theme of the movie is, or at least reinforces what the theme is, because at the end of the day, the theme and the meaning seem really tacked on and rushed. It's more like this movie was just having fun with the Bill and Ted mythos.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and how their daughters are exactly like them, but DJs, I guess.
Yeah, I would not be going in with too many expectations if I were to watch that one. Yeah.
But I did have
funny.
fun.
Yeah.
I
Well,
did have
I mean
fun, though. Yeah.
that seems like the main point of those sorts of movies.
But I couldn't tell, like most movies that are kind of working off of 80s material, like, am I supposed to come at this like the campy style where you just not meant the question, like the mall scene or the whole why are the historical figures going with Bill and Ted into the time booth? You know, like they just they're playing this music like double the pleasure, double the fun. If you remember, and that's it's corny and it's fun, and they don't do that kind of montage this time. It's, by the way, it's the dollars doing it this time, so like, and it's done much faster. Or maybe it's the same amount of time, right, of gathering. It's like, hey, let's gather even more people. I think they actually need to do that, because instead they kept it to 5. So they actually, because there is a scene for each person they pick up, instead of like having a montage where they pick up 20 people. Like it should be like do you know there's a scene from Frasier where it's like he's supposed to like, he's told like, Frasier, have you ever heard the phrase less is more, which is a Courvoisier motto? He's like, well, if less is more, then think about how much more would be. So if they went with that, like there was a lot of humor that just wasn't there. Like there wasn't this overarching funniness to it. It was actually kind of dry at times, because they're trying to like have a kind of moralistic point about there's no shortcuts, which could be a theme of this video as well as
tying it all back in there.
There's no shortcuts.
There you go.
But it all wraps up at the end and kind of feels like there was a shortcut, like because it all just comes together without any preparation. Well, the preparation was the daughters getting the historical figures, but it's not. It doesn't feel like a lot. It doesn't feel like it was an earned ending.
Yeah, it wasn't earned.
Because they had to. I mean, it was so important that they get Death back. They couldn't have had and that was what kind of that kind of ruined it for me. But it made it less fun because I feel like that could have been spent on something else.
On building that Bill and Ted lore, yeah.
Yeah. the relationship that they have with death was so critical to the lore.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which no, I didn't like that at all, because it's like what made the second movie fun wasn't just like that Death was like a dork or something, but it's like it wasn't essential. You know, it was just part of it, because it was like going to heaven and picking up station and going to hell and encountering the stuff there. You know, it's like it's everything. That's Bill and Ted, is that everything matters. And the third, the wrap up the trilogy is to kind of like, it almost had a nothing kind of matters tone. Not really, but it kind of felt like they could have put anything, you know, like all these reboots, they could have done anything they wanted. And so they didn't have to be methodical about what their choices were with the script or what they choosing what to do and not to do.
Interesting. So Natalie has a good question there. Any view on using hemp in housing construction, or like hempcrete or that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, actually, I haven't studied hempcrete itself, because like it's rather it's prose versus concrete.
Yeah.
But certainly, yeah, of course, natural building materials and similar, natural building materials. What do you mean, like homeopathy building material? No. Yes, hemp everything, of course. The view is it's positive. It's, I mean, just like using wood, if maybe hemp will replace wood products more and more as wood stocks, or it's just the supply structure of it, you know, that makes it expensive. But
for sure,
because sometimes the wood's coming from far away, it's not, or it is produced regionally, you know, and if there's a regional supplier and the price is kept low, if you're not buying it from Home Depot, or Lowe's.
That makes sense. Cool. All right, let's keep going.
Their home took 54 hours to print and cost £176,000, 20% cheaper than identical construction. The walls of this home are made of 2 layers of polyisofoam with poured concrete in the voids. Installing windows, doors, a roof, appliances, and millwork took another 4 months. The outside of the home was manually finished with smooth plaster. Polyiso needs to be sprayed in a controlled environment, so the entire site was tented. You know what could be a better alternative? Stacking ICF blocks with plastic webs to nail or screw into. The next claim is that 3D printing will make jobs unnecessary. We are a long way off from that potentially happening. I think there's a common thread behind all these misleading claims. The productivity of the construction industry is lagging far behind others. Outsiders from the tech field want to fix it by disrupting and automating the entire industry without having any knowledge of its intricacies. They think that 3D printing is to construction as Tesla is to automation. A Tesla vehicle can be driven anywhere in the world.
Which, by the way,
relatively small
all these
things.
tech bros,
the construction industry.
Yeah.
All these tech bros haven't really solved anything when you think about it long enough. So
no, I mean they haven't invented most of the things that they even claim they've invented. They mostly just bought up other companies and hired engineers to do the hard work. So yeah.
That aside, but just the whole like disruption of, you know, we fixed Uber fixed taxis, you know, or something.
Yeah,
or
definitely did not.
Or whatever.
All it did was fix your ability to hail a taxi. But yeah, didn't do anything for the actual cost of running the industry or any of that.
Yeah, John's right. Okay, let's keep going.
Pyramid
She continues how
is at the mercy of nature and humans. There are millions of variables at play. Soil conditions, weather, local materials, culture, economy, design codes, and of course, form and function. The programmatic needs of a hospital, office building, factory, apartment complex, and home are vastly different. The global construction industry has thousands of specialized fields. Improving the coordination between all these trades is an ongoing struggle, but automating the printing of walls isn't the answer. Even on 3D printed concrete structures, you need humans to monitor, calibrate, and clean the machine, add reinforcement and insulation, frame out the door and window openings. Take a look at this smooth finish 3D printed garage in Florida. Since the client wasn't satisfied with the rough appearance of printed concrete, it was manually smoothened out. So much for eliminating humans on job sites.
So this is the result, the raw result of 3D printing. It's kind of like concrete corduroy, but if you don't love this look, they can smooth it out for you and make it look just like a regular wall.
The next claim
Well,
is that
thanks,
3D
Walk
printed
Alley.
homes can solve homelessness and housing shortages. Like I've said in earlier videos, the
Everything
arrogance
will
of
do that.
designers and architects really
Everything,
shines
nothing.
when they talk about homeless shelters. Making a shipping container or a 3D printed concrete shelter will not solve homelessness. We need to approach the issue with humility and address the underlying socioeconomic and psychological issues, among other things. Lafarge Wholesome has ambitious plans to build
she some kind of
affordable,
socialist?
low-carbon housing and schools in Africa using 3D printed technology. I recently spoke to Nicholas Patel, the founder of Full Bore Africa, who grew up and ran several construction businesses in Kenya. His realistic perspective of 3D printing in Africa was eye-opening. He pointed out the lack of consistent power, the need for several backup generators, the carbon emissions shipping the machine to Africa, the poor infrastructure getting to job sites, the legal issues clearing the expensive 3D printers at ports, 24-hour security, the cost of foreign trained specialists to run the machine and their hazard pay, the dirt and sand that will get caught in the grooves of the 3D printed structure, and the difficulty in getting high quality, consistent windows and doors to fit into the precise openings created by 3D printers. Nicholas believes in light gauge steel frame.
Yeah, there's no
a
give there,
structurally
you know.
sound steel frame.
No gift there?
There's no give. Like in construction,
Oh,
like
give.
there needs to be a
Right.
certain needs to be a certain leeway or the ability to just take off a little bit more.
Right.
To
Yeah.
put things together. To cut away and then fill the gap that's created, because nothing is going to be, because like the whole the straight line and is a abstraction, and so is in a drawing. You don't draw anything to as close as like a fourth of an inch or something.
Right.
I mean, you almost keep it I keep it to 3-inch increments or something. I mean, or 6 inches, like half a foot. Because half a foot is like the kind of gaps that you'll naturally have, and so on. So like one of the patterns of a pattern language is like to have 2-inch trim, that you'll always have all these gaps and things when you're constructing something, these imperfections, and that you should cover them with 2-inch trim, and that gives a building its character.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. And I was just thinking too, with like interior non-load bearing walls, if you ever wanted to change that, knock out a wall, make your kitchen bigger or something like that, that's a pretty monumental effort if you're going through like 1 or 2 feet of concrete to have to do that. So-
Well, and that's kind of the problem with engineers trying to the architecture field is a house is not a bridge.
Right.
It's not going to just do one thing forever, and it just needs to be changeable, for one. And the second is that you're designing for a human that will use it, and a human is also not a robot that will work under certain conditions and have these criteria. You can't map, you can't quantify a human quite so much. I mean, you can have a survey of sorts or a poll, but that's why a designer has to meet with the client over and over and over, because hey, they'll change their mind. Certain computer algorithm of like a house or something, or a 3D printed model it's an abstraction and shouldn't be taken as reality. But to 3D print something, or to I don't know, machines make a machine for living, it was kind of a bad concept from Corbusier because it eliminates the human as much as at the same time they're talking of humans being able to paint and transform the shell to their liking. There really isn't kind of a means to do that, which kind of needs to be almost incorporated in the construction, that this will be changed or so on. Like there's the design where like half the house is built because like people can maybe only afford half a house at a time.
Right.
And then so like one half is built and then the other half, which is like a poured concrete, and then the other half is assumed that they'll like build with CMU blocks or wood when they can build and then have a full house. But at least the half house has like the basic rooms, and then they'll have living space later.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that one like that won an international prize.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense in a lot of ways because, overall you're spending not quite half, but pretty close to half what you normally would constructing housing for people. And then just but then also, like you say, allowing things to kind of emerge as they do, and you actually have some wiggle room to play around with the space that's not built. So that's cool. All right, continuing on.
Should be used to create the bones of a building. Homeowners can choose any infill that they are comfortable with, whether it's compacted bricks made from soil, thatch, or concrete. This method speeds up traditional home building, empowers local communities, respects local culture and environmental conditions, and it's affordable to purchase and maintain. This is what I'm talking about when I say we need to approach housing shelters and infrastructure with humility. Imposing outlandish designs that stick out like a sore thumb isn't the solution. Another claim is that 3D printing is sustainable. While prefabrication and 3D printing can help minimize waste, generalized claims of sustainability over all other forms of construction are untrue. The building construction industry accounts for 40% of all energy-related carbon dioxide emissions, of which cement accounts for 8%. As much as I love the material and the solidity of concrete structures, it is one of the most destructive materials on Earth. It is responsible for almost a tenth of the world's industrial water use. It adds to the heat island effect. Limestone quarries and cement factories are air pollutants. Accelerants that are added to concrete to decrease curing time can pollute indoor air. Also, walls are a tiny portion of the entire structure. We need a holistic approach to construction to make it truly sustainable. Now, don't get me wrong, I am excited about 3D printed construction, whether it's concrete, mud, or synthetic stone. I love the raw, layered appearance of 3D printed homes. I even made a video on this technology a couple of years ago.
Hey everyone, it's Belinda. Welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be an introduction to 3D printed concrete.
I do not think the technology is a gimmick, but I despise the sensationalist coverage, misleading claims, and overpromises. They generate a lot of buzz and probably help fund startups, but I think the lies cheapen the value of the technology. In 2019, Cobod released a white paper titled The Truth: Facts about the True State of the Art of 3D Construction Printing. They tackled the misconceptions in the press, like the Office of the Future in Dubai, which was actually made of precast elements printed in China. All the interesting architectural details were not 3D printed, but made manually. They also clarified that no one has printed a building in 24 hours, no one has printed an entire building, just the walls, and that as of fall 2019, only 3 companies supply printers. Cobod and Perry Group are setting a precedent for the rest of the industry. They are pushing for responsible coverage. Right now, 3D printing seems to be a solution looking for a problem. Maybe it solves homelessness. Maybe it's the cheapest and fastest construction methodology. Maybe it's sustainable and will fix the planet. It's going through an identity crisis and trying to fit into niches instead of just being itself. The technology has so much potential, but it's still in its infancy stage.
Can you pause?
I see so many parallels between the hype.
Go ahead.
So I kind of agree with her that, like, it's because of the bad coverage, it doesn't mean the technology is bullshit completely. But but then with her monologue continuing, she points out that it was a tech that wasn't addressing an actual problem. There really isn't a problem
Right.
in putting together prefab walls.
Mm-hmm.
And if you you could print your elements in the factory and ship the elements, and that's one application of using 3D printing in production.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really the same as 3D printing the home.
Right.
And in fact, throw out the term. Don't even use it. Just throw it into the web of technologies of prefab, pre-made elements from a factory that are modular and stuff. That's where kind of I see things going, or at least where things could go or should go. So I kind of agree with her, but I also don't agree with her. In that, like, well, okay, what is this for then? It's in an identity crisis. It's like, well, what identity does it really have except as a gimmick? You're saying it's not a gimmick, but that's all it has been so far.
Yeah,
a gimmick, because it can't even print a roof.
Yeah.
I mean, if it could like print a dome or something, but again, how would that be easier than just having the balloon and then pouring concrete on it?
Pouring concrete over it.
Yeah, or the stuff that's already tried and tested. So as usual, like with permaculture design, which Belinda here is not like adept at or part of, is you going back to traditional means, and the traditional being the cheapest, less complex. Of course, there's a place for professionals and specialists in understanding. That's why you have designers in the first place.
For sure.
But having like thousands and thousands of types of specialists, where everyone can have their little niche and part in the industry, their place, is kind of what drives costs up, because each of the specialists needs their own salary, or a firm, or they each have their own business, and then whether it be a developer, let's say you're a co-op developer, you have to deal with like 100 different firms. And they all have their own invoices, and you almost you need a volunteer or you need someone just to manage that. You need a project manager. Firms have project managers because, I mean, architects would be the project manager, but things got so complicated that the architect couldn't handle it all. So then the project manager exists for that reason. And a host of other positions. So it just all gets so bloated. And so sort of like the treadmill of technology in the modern era is that a lot of the problems that computers solve are solved by the over complexity created by the fact that computers exist. Because computers make things so complex, they make their problems that can only be solved by computers. It's circular.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of like how cars are always the idea of building more car infrastructure is always to solve the problems that the cars produce in the first. Yeah.
More driving is the solution to some people driving. And that is I bang my head against the table. Thinking about that. That is the mindset. Everyone in my city, even those who are nominal numb-tots, even a lot of these numb-tots, people are supposedly transit first. They're still thinking in terms of people are driving, and we have to put all our activism around. We have to tiptoe around that.
Yeah.
That having a wider sidewalk is a consolation prize. Like we should be happy or sort of satisfied, or maybe not satisfied. That's not what he meant. But there was this one commenter that was like being real smarmy about this post. But like a friend of mine was pointing out, if you're increasing the car infrastructure, it doesn't matter if you're widening the sidewalk. Right. It's meaningless because you're still putting cars first, and that means it's dangerous to not be in a car. As long as there's a certain amount of cars, everyone has to drive. And that's the problem. So the answer is to limit driving, or since we're talking about housing construction, is to kind of carbon limits, I guess, on how much waste you can make in a building. And I suppose 3D printing does make less waste, but so does any kind of prefab. So it's really, it's just moving towards prefab. And if that includes 3D printing elements, like using a 3D printer, but like a larger one in a factory, so it doesn't have to move and it doesn't have to be rented, then that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, let's wrap up this video here.
And media coverage of shipping container homes and 3D printed homes. I'm sure people in the comments will call me a buzzkill like they did with the container home video. But I hope this video helps people understand the limitations of the tech. It helps companies and countries realize that it may not be appropriate for them. And I hope it encourages critique. Let me know what you think about the technology in the comments below. I'd love to visit one of.
And John says, just before we get into that part, John has just said ICP block is better. I'm not sure what ICP block is. What is that? I'm not familiar with that.
It's basically like a wall section where it's a pre-made wall. So you got your structure element, your insulation, and it's basically in a panel, and you basically can just stick the panels together, and there's your wall.
Gotcha.
There's different types of or styles of ICP block or block. There's videos like made by Belinda Carr about them. Type it into YouTube. There's this ton videos like this, or the Earthship one, discussing them. And yeah, it's more like building out a house with Legos, instead of with toothpaste. Which I don't know. Just watching the 3D printers in action, I almost get angry thinking about how people think this is like less wasteful or less, like somehow faster. Like, oh, it's so fast, like faster than just assembling like a Rector set on a site.
Probably not.
It just seems to be taking. It uses so much resources to just do so little. Especially when you can use hemp. But yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
But like tech bros will always try to like insert something else, like, oh no, it'll be fine if you just use hempcrete in the 3D printer.
Yeah,
we can obviously do that later. Well, why aren't you doing it now?
Exactly.
You know, if you were thinking about, you weren't. It turns out you actually weren't thinking about sustainability. You weren't thinking about how to make it more efficient. You're just thinking about, this is what you could do now because that's what the financing allows, or whatever, or your mindset.
Yeah. It does really seem like just a few super tech forward people really got excited about the idea of 3D printing houses. And then just got so invested into it, probably mentally and then also financially, that now they got to justify all the resources they've spent on doing it.
I mean, like with any kind of new tech, it's like, oh, you can 3D print a little knick-knack toy with a 3D printer. Like, oh, we could make a house like this, or we could, do this, apply Uber to housing, and that's been great, right? Or
what if Uber but housing?
Well, Airbnb.
Yeah. There you go. So that's
you have landlords buying property just to make Airbnbs out of them.
Oh, my couple apartments ago, that's what they did. Once we moved out, they converted it to an Airbnb. It's a nice neighborhood right by the university. Blocks from transit, a really prime location. And yeah, it's just Airbnb, top and bottom floor now.
Yeah. Natalie brings up Sears Homes, which, a lot of boomers could, build their first house with the Sears home, and then like they could say, yeah, my grandpa built this house. I mean, that's sort of sometimes what they meant. And but yeah, it gave you were building the house because you were getting a kit, and it was changeable. You could it would be renovated 20, 30 years later to update the insulation, let's say. But yeah, they had it there, and but again, it's like you had these houses that looked like a traditional style or Tudor or these historicist styles, but they were from a Sears catalog. So they're
Right.
still very much a modern prefab kind of product, mass market product. But
Yeah.
people are still kind of building them themselves with subcontractors along the way.
For sure. For sure.
It's cutting to the earth with a 3D grinder.
3D grinder. Yeah. Interesting idea there.
Oh, 3D print, but like going down. Well, I guess, but then yeah. So then instead of filling a solid, it's cutting a void down. I don't know. I feel like a backhoe could do that just as easily.
Yeah. Could be.
You just measure out the walls with your wire, and then dig.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. All right. So, any more thoughts wrapping up here before we get to plugs and whatnot?
No. There's still 2 more videos that I brought to the table. I guess we could save them for next time, and I'll probably in the next few weeks I'll find another 2. I want to point out it's not really pertinent to what we do, but I've been hired for a 9-to-5 job, so I'm probably working full time like you, which kind of is both blessing and curse. I don't have the free time to kind of do whatever project I want, but it probably means I'll have to be more focused about what the projects I am doing, and actually focus on doing them. There's almost like that burden of having more free time, that you just take longer to do everything.
Sure.
Or you kind of, I don't know. I let a lot of hours slip by me instead of planning what I'm going to do hour to hour.
Gotcha. So yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you're definitely always welcome back on the show. I always enjoy having you on and your perspective and stuff. So
yeah, no, we'll keep doing this. I love it.
Yeah,
especially since I'm so wishy-washy about doing my own streams. But I think with the Restream tool, maybe I'll give it a try, and then I'll feel more comfortable. Because going to YouTube or Twitch and choosing one to the other. But also the promoting, I think about doing that, and I'm not going to promote and say I'm going to stream this time, because for the last 2 weeks I've been like, oh, I'll stream tonight, and then I don't, and I'll stream. Oh no, I'll stream. I keep procrastinating basically, because one night just isn't as good as the next, it seems, or there's no good night. I think at the end of the day, I just need to have my own recording space, because this isn't my own recording space, and that will not be until next June.
Next June, even. Okay.
We'll be. It's when you're in your 30s, everything's in this scale of years, not.
I've learned that as well.
That it takes things, because I don't know, you're moving. Things move slower. You're doing things for longer. When you have a career, it's in decades, and not like jumping from job to job, 1 year to the next. Right. Because I'm not the type of future shock person where I'm always like looking for the next job. But that was kind of my problem last year, that I was doing 4 different gigs that paid very little, and not having a full job that's a 9-to-5. So now I have that until April, because it's temporary, but we'll see what follows after it, because it's back in civil service. Once you're in, you got a foot in the door. But that's true. I thought I had that already 6 years ago, but it was actually downsized, not upsizing me.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, because some offices are different. Some offices they want to keep you around, because it was usually college labor they're using. But they were cut down to the bone by Como, so they just they needed me, so they weren't going to transfer me or suggest I transfer, or I wasn't. I don't know what the dealio was, but I don't know. It's usually a thing that you get transferred by the manager or something, or you get picked up. You don't have to job search while you're in civil service. I mean, you interview and so on and apply maybe, but I was applying. I was in the lists, and I guess I don't know if that was enough. But the point was the job was being downsized, and I was like getting paid even less, and that's when I left. And so maybe that was like a mistake in the long run. But I wanted to do something different. I wanted to work in the public with people, and get a taste of that. So that's what I've been doing the last 5-6 years. So I guess that stage of my life is over. We'll see what the next one holds.
Well, I hope better things for you. I hope onwards and upwards.
Yeah. I mean, the overall positive is that I make more money, and then I can actually like buy a derelict house and renovate it.
Nice.
So,
yeah, very cool.
Because the last 5 years I've been making no money, so it's like I haven't been able to buy or do all the normal 30-something things that you do. So, arrested development kind of stuff, but not because I've been developing by having all these different types of jobs. But not many, but just different. Anyway, all right. It's good. So, a 3 Left show. The podcast is still going strong. Subscribe. It is a podcast, but I do host it. I do share the audio, and you can stream it on any podcast and Spotify and whatever. So it's accessible, pretty much, more or less. I just don't upload it to YouTube. I just wish I got that in my routine, but it takes, I don't know, so much of my mental strength to do the routine I have, which is to do the show, edit it.
I hear you. Oh, audio just cut out for a second there. I don't know what. I'm not hearing you now, Dan. Still not hearing you. I don't know what happened there. It was just all of a sudden it whoop. Okay, you can reconnect. Not hearing you yet. Okay. Now you're back.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, my the wire came out of my mic.
I figured it was something like that.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on, and we're all kind of on a time limit too, thinking of climate change, or if not the big stuff, but even just like gentrification in my city is happening in the next 5 years. So like, if I'm going to buy a house and rehab it like my father, I need to do that in the next few years, or it's going to be too late, because we already got the renovate, the houses that cost more to renovate than to tear down. We got New York City people looking at land.
Oh, wow.
In the hood.
Got those land speculators coming in. Yep.
And we actually there was a house recently built in the hood with private money, which has not occurred in like 30, 40 years. So, yeah, it's about to get way more expensive, which is bad for the working poor who live in Arbor Hill, the hood. But it kind of, it breaks the status quo of depredation, but it doesn't solve the equity problems. So, because we're all kind of poor and stuck in the whole, like, yeah, we can chip in $5,000, but that's not enough. We don't got the credit to, like, take out the bank loans or whatever. But
that's a squeeze from both sides for those people, for sure. Getting squeezed out of their current neighborhood and probably don't have some better options to go to at the same time. So
I guess we should all move to Wyoming and then turn it blue.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
There was this political cartoon that was like,
oh, that's a funny one.
Smartly saying, "Hey, millennials, you want to make a difference? Move to, and if you work from home job, you should move to one of these 5 red states and flip the Senate." Complete idiocy.
Yeah. That's funny though.
Which is odd though, because Boise, like Idaho, is exploding with demand. There's apparently like all these people
Really?
who work from home, or maybe their job doesn't depend on them living in Seattle, but it's too expensive in Seattle, so they're moving to Boise, Idaho. So the construction industry is having a hard time keeping up with the demand there. Because obviously there hasn't been a lot of call for construction in Boise, Idaho. And it's really far out there. So shipping all the materials and shit there to build houses is inflating the cost. So you got they're building $1 million, detached houses. They cost $1 million, but it would only cost maybe 200 grand anywhere else. But it's crazy. Like, why move there? Because like they don't have to commute to Seattle or something.
I guess I'm sure there's.
Yeah, when you have this class of people that can literally live anywhere they want.
Yeah.
As long as there's internet, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure it's the kind of people that don't really need to rely on social services all that much. Don't really care what the schools are like nearby, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's or when they move there, their taxes or whatever wealth they're bringing is going to make everything better. Their pay. I mean, the people chase them to serve them. So wherever they move, all these other service sectors will move with them. And that's the economic determinism of the free market, people. I mean, you can live wherever you want in America as long as there's a job there, which is kind of what my comment with the whole like millennials move to Wyoming. Like, no. Right. You're assuming these tech jobs that are like work from home. There's a reason they're in metro areas.
Right.
They really can't be anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, if I think the people moving to Boise are those that their income is completely passive. They're the parasites. They're
landlords.
Landlord, and they don't have to live. They can have their own property management people doing stuff in Seattle. They don't have to be there. Or if they do, conference call, or they drive in once a week, whatever.
There you go.
Or hell,
that's probably it. You're probably right. Yeah, or as Natalie just said, if you really like potatoes, though.
Yeah, sure.
That could be another reason.
Potatoes anyway, but Because I looked into this, why are people moving to Boise? And all the coverage was just about how their population is growing, not about why.
Interesting. You think they'd want to know why?
Journalists, the most. I mean, depending on the budget, that's how curators you're allowed to do.
True. Very true.
Okay.
All right.
I don't want to keep you any longer.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted to. As you can see, I have your show brought up right now.
This episode is not one of mine, but it's the clipped audio from the Twitch panel I was on about leftist infighting. I include the link to the full video. It was interesting. Funny thing so I start the call by saying like I plan on taking this audio and putting it on radio, so if everyone could be aware of that and swear less, that would be helpful. And so everyone did, except for the Aussie who had tech troubles in the beginning, so he didn't hear this. So
he didn't get the warning.
So whenever he spoke, he would be dropping F-bombs in his.
Oh,
I would. There's nothing wrong with it, but it meant I had to comb through his audio and cut the fuckings every time he said fucking this and fucking that.
Oh, jeez.
Because it was funny. But it's funny that the Aussie the only one swearing. That's if you didn't hear me explaining how like I want to put this on Pacifica later, if everyone could swear less, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And they're asking, really? Like, yeah, we follow FCC rules, which means you can't even say F blank. Because that implies a fuck.
Oh, you can't even say F?
Yes.
That's too much, huh?
This was from a Supreme Court ruling. It was in...
Really?
I forget the year, but it was like late aughts. and someone at the Grammys or the Oscars kind of said "F Bush" or "F the war." I think it was probably "F the war."
Oh yeah, I think I recall that. Yeah.
One of those liberal SAG people, and and yeah, and they were sued by the FCC, and the court ruled that even though they just said F, they implied an expletive, and that counts.
Oh jeez. Wow. What a silly country we live in.
Oh, very silly. I mean,
This
this was ancient history for Zoomers, but there was a big controversy in the mid aughts about what was it? One of the what's her first name? Jesse Janet Jackson at the Super Bowl, and
Yeah.
her tit was visible for a split second.
Yeah.
And this was like a really a big issue, mostly made by the Bush administration. Made a big issue of it because they wanted to sue the Super Bowl and fine them for this. So it became a
ridiculous.
issue. And
as though heads were exploding across the country because a breast was visible.
Well, every conservative culture warrior was like, this is because she was wearing a skimpy outfit already, I guess, and the fact that it was like something that you could take like the bra piece off. Or something like that.
So wardrobe malfunction.
It definitely, well, it looked like, I mean, I don't know, he grabbed her chest, and I guess he just meant to drag his hand or something, but like he did really rip it off. So it's kind of odd. Well, because the line is like, "I'm gonna have you naked by the end of this song." So I think he was the choreography was he kind of acts like he's taking a bra off, but his hand maybe got caught
somehow
on the
it happened,
and then it ripped off. Anyway,
so silly.
And that's the kind of silly things that hell, just the culture war itself is like it makes America silly. That we're a declining empire, and this is how we cope with that.
I know.
Not we cope with it by at least culturally doing socialism, and then physically doing it when practical in real life.
Right. Absolutely.
Turning back to these radical traditions, instead of escaping to monkey. Escaping to monkey.
Escaping to monkey. Oh, that's an interesting framing.
Returning to monkey. Yeah.
Oh yeah, returning to monkey.
Return to comrades.
All right, I'll take that. All right, well, thank you so much, Dan, for doing another stream with me and sticking with all this stuff. And as always, very very fun conversation. Oh, we're gonna do that. Oh God, we're gonna try and coordinate a white guy handshake.
No. I was just trying to do Bill and Ted like. Excellent to each other.
There you go. All right. Well, again, thank you so much, and you have a great rest of your evening. Good luck with your new job too.
Yeah. Bye.
All right, bye. All right. So that was Dan from the Three Left Show. Go check them out. Always a lot of fun when he comes on. I always enjoy myself. And thank you for being in the chat, especially John and Natalie. You guys have been great putting questions up and comments and stuff like that. So definitely really appreciate that. I think we're just going to go ahead and raid into somebody. For those of you who are joining me on Twitch. What was that? I'm sorry, there was a big crash. One second. I'm going to be right back. All right. So sorry about that. Yeah, I heard a huge crash. It sounded like someone just fell off the roof or something like that. So I had to go check and make sure my wife was still okay. And she is. So don't worry about that. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and for those of you who are on Twitch, we're going to raid into someone else. So if you have any suggestions, now's the time to throw those out there. Otherwise, I'll just pick somebody. Yeah, Twitch is a fun place to hang out too. And definitely one of the big advantages that it has is you can raid into other streams and give your audience to someone else and expose your audience to more cool content creators, stuff like that. So that's where I came up doing all this streaming, and so I got a soft spot for it, for sure. But yeah, so I think I'm just going to pick someone then, since I haven't seen any suggestions there. All right, we're going to go back. Let's see who's streaming right now on Twitch. I'll find something cool for you. Let's see. All right. Echoplex Media. Freems, definitely an option with Freems. Or Lost Sue. Maybe. Let's see what EPA regulations is up to. I'll check out what their stream's covering tonight, and we'll decide if that's going to be the one. Looks like they're just gaming right now. So, instead, I think we'll go... Who are we going to pick? Boy. Not on right now. Echoplex Media. Let's check out and see what they're doing right now. Oh, looks like they're either just starting or just finishing. I can't really tell, so we're not going to do that one. Perhaps Freems instead then. See if anyone made any suggestions. Okay. I think we'll do Freems tonight then. So for those of you on Twitch, that's who I'll be sending you over to. And for everyone else, thank you all so much for joining me. I really appreciate you guys showing up. Geez. I wanted to also mention, before I go, one last thing. That on the Facebook channel, or the Facebook group that I manage, Left Signal Boost, we have just opened up our voting for the second annual Lefties Award Show. And it's just a fun little thing. We get together, and anyone who's a member of Left Signal Boost can nominate someone for any of the dozens of categories we have. We try to cover content creators and work from all different sort of genres and platforms and whatever. And right now, if you go there, you can nominate your favorite leftist content creators or artists or authors. There's a whole bunch of different categories you can go and check out and nominate people for. And then in November, we're all going to vote on it as a group as well. And the day after Thanksgiving, or day after U.S. Thanksgiving, I should say, we're going to have our award show and just get together and show some really cool leftist content. All the nominees will get, a little clip of their work showcased during that night. So even if they don't end up winning, you'll get some exposure to that as well. Oh, hello, Heather. Good to see you tonight. So anyway, yeah, head on over to Left Signal Boost on Facebook, and you can nominate your favorite content creators from the last year. So it should be a good time. And it's usually a lot of fun and also informative too. Anyway, so Freems is who we're going to raid into. And I'm going to start that right now. Oh, thanks. Thanks so much for saying it's been a good stream. I really appreciate that. So until next time, folks, Lictam, and I hope to see you Wednesday for the theory stream.